The boardroom doors slammed open, and Ethan Caldwell rolled his wheelchair to the head of the table, facing 12 men who wanted him gone. His Uncle Richard smiled, the kind of smile that came before a knife. "You have 48 hours to announce an engagement, or we vote you out." Ethan's hands tightened on the armrests. He'd built this empire from nothing, survived an accident that should have killed him, and now they thought a marriage requirement would break him. He had one move left. One person who owed him nothing and expected even less. A woman who'd learned the hard way that everyone lies. If you want to see how this power game unfolds, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The rain hit the windows of the Caldwell Industries Tower like bullets, 43 floors above a city that didn't sleep and didn't forgive. Ethan Caldwell sat in his office, staring at the financial reports that didn't add up, listening to the clock tick toward a deadline that would end everything he'd built. His phone buzzed. Richard's name appeared on the screen. He didn't answer. The door opened anyway. His uncle walked in without knocking, bringing the smell of expensive cologne and older money. Richard Caldwell had the kind of face that photographs loved: sharp jawline, silver hair, the smile of a man who'd never been told no. He pulled out the chair across from Ethan's desk and sat down like he owned it. "You're not returning my calls." "I've been busy," Ethan said. "Too busy to save your own company?" Richard crossed his legs, adjusting the crease in his pants. "The board meets in 2 days. You know what they're going to say." Ethan rolled his wheelchair back slightly, creating distance. 6 months since the accident. 6 months of physical therapy, legal battles, and watching his uncle position himself as the company's savior. "They'll say whatever you tell them to say. They'll say you're unstable, a liability, that the company needs leadership that can—" Richard paused, his eyes dropping to the wheelchair. "Stand on its own." The silence stretched between them, thick with things that couldn't be said in an office with glass walls. "What do you want, Richard?" His uncle leaned forward, elbows on knees, the posture of a man delivering good news. "I want what's best for Caldwell Industries, what's best for the family. You're 34, unmarried, no heirs, and after the accident, say it. People are concerned about succession planning, about stability. The optics are bad, Ethan. You need to show them you're thinking long-term, that you're settled." Ethan laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You want me to get married. I want you to announce an engagement within 48 hours, or the board votes on a motion to restructure leadership. They already have the votes." Richard stood, buttoning his jacket. "I'm trying to help you, nephew. This is the easiest solution for everyone." "And if I don't?" Richard walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. "Then I stop trying to help, and you lose everything your father built." The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot. Ethan sat alone in the office, watching the rain, doing the math. Richard had been planning this for months, probably since the day of the accident, maybe before. The votes were already locked, the narrative already written. Unstable leadership, tragic accident, time for new blood. The marriage requirement wasn't protection. It was a trap designed to look like a lifeline. His phone buzzed again, this time a different name, James Chen, his head of security and the only person in the building he trusted completely. "I found her," James said without preamble. "Charlotte Hayes, currently living in apartment 4B on the Lower West Side, works as a freelance financial consultant, former investigator for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, until the Meridian scandal." "You knew about that?" Ethan pulled up a file on his computer, one he'd been reviewing for the past week. Charlotte Hayes, 31 years old, graduate of Columbia Law, 5 years with the DA's office building cases against financial fraud until she'd made the mistake of trusting the wrong source. The case had collapsed, her reputation had burned, and she'd disappeared from New York's legal circles entirely. "I know she took the fall for someone else's mistake," Ethan said. "I know she's too smart for her current job, and I know she needs money. She also needs a reason to say yes to whatever you're about to offer." Ethan closed the file. "Everyone needs something, James. I just need to figure out what she's willing to trade for it." Okay. Charlotte Hayes was 3 glasses into a bottle of wine that cost $8 and tasted like regret when someone knocked on her door. She checked her phone. 9:47 p.m. No missed calls, no texts, no food delivery she'd forgotten ordering. The knock came again, patient and persistent. She looked through the peephole and saw a man in an expensive suit standing next to a wheelchair. Her brain took a moment to process what she was seeing, then another moment to recognize the face. Ethan Caldwell, chairman of Caldwell Industries. The man whose company she'd been researching for the past month, trying to find enough dirt to sell to a journalist who might actually pay her rent. She opened the door but left the chain on. "Miss Hayes." His voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need to rise to be heard. "I need 10 minutes of your time." "How did you get my address?" "I need 9 minutes now." Charlotte looked at him through the gap in the door. Sharp suit, tired eyes, hands resting calmly on the armrests of a wheelchair that probably cost more than her car. Behind him stood another man, older, watching the hallway like he expected trouble. "What do you want?" "To offer you a job." "I don't work for corporations anymore." "This isn't corporate work, it's personal." Ethan glanced at his watch. 8 minutes, Miss Hayes. After that, I'll leave and you can go back to your research on my company's offshore holdings, which are legal, by the way. You won't find anything. Charlotte felt something cold slide down her spine. "You're watching me." "I'm aware of you. There's a difference." He met her eyes through the gap. "I'm also aware that you're 3 months behind on rent, that your credentials are real even if your current clients aren't, and that you're too proud to ask your family for help. I'm offering you a solution to all of those problems, but I need an answer in the next 7 minutes because I have a board meeting in 36 hours that will determine the future of a $4 billion company." She should have closed the door, should have called the police, should have done anything except slide the chain free and step back to let him in. But she'd spent 2 years taking safe choices, and safe choices had left her drinking cheap wine in an apartment that smelled like the Indian restaurant downstairs. Ethan rolled into her living room, scanning the space with the quick assessment of someone used to gathering information fast. His security guards stayed outside, pulling the door closed behind them. Charlotte crossed her arms. 6 minutes. "I need a wife," she laughed. Couldn't help it. "You came to the wrong apartment. There's a dating app for rich guys with—" She caught herself, but not fast enough. "With disabilities?" Ethan's expression didn't change. "I'm not looking for romance, Miss Hayes. I'm looking for a business arrangement. 6 months, public appearances. Enough commitment to satisfy my board that I'm thinking long term. After that, a quiet divorce and a settlement that will solve your financial problems permanently." Charlotte walked to the kitchen, poured herself another glass of wine. Her hand shook slightly, and she hated that he could probably see it. "Why me?" "Because you're smart enough to understand what I'm offering and desperate enough to consider it. Because you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And because you already know how to keep secrets." "I don't keep secrets. That's what got me fired." "You took the fall for your supervisor's mistake. You kept his secret even when it destroyed your career. That's exactly the kind of loyalty I need." Ethan rolled closer, stopping a careful distance away. "I'm not offering you a fairy tale, Miss Hayes. I'm offering you a contract. 6 months of playing a role in exchange for financial security and a chance to rebuild your reputation. That's all this is." Charlotte drank, buying time to think. The man in front of her was offering her an escape from an apartment she hated, from a career that had stalled, from a life that felt like it was slowly drowning. But he was also offering her something else, a front row seat to whatever game was being played at Caldwell Industries. "What's the catch?" "The catch is that my family will hate you. The media will investigate you, and somewhere in the next 6 months, someone will try to use you against me." Ethan's voice was steady, clinical. "You'll be a target the moment you say yes, but you'll also be protected, paid, and positioned to walk away with enough money to start over anywhere you want. How much?" $2 million. Half up front, half when the divorce is finalized." Charlotte set down her glass. "You're serious?" "I don't joke about business, Miss Hayes. And if I say no, then I find someone else and you go back to researching offshore accounts that won't pay your rent." Ethan checked his watch again. 3 minutes. She walked to the window, looking down at the street where a black car idled at the curb, exhaust rising in the cold air. $2 million. 6 months. A chance to disappear after and start something new, somewhere nobody knew about the Meridian scandal or the career she'd lost. But there was something else. Something in the way Ethan had come alone, had offered her the truth instead of a pretty story, had laid out the risks like he respected her enough to make her own choice. "Why are you really doing this?" She turned back to face him. "The truth." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the wheelchair's armrest. "Because my uncle wants me gone and he's using my accident as leverage. Because I spent 6 months learning to walk again, and I'm not giving up the company I built just because I need wheels now. And because everyone else I could ask would want something I can't give them, romance or love or some fantasy about what this could become." He met her eyes. "You don't want any of that. You want money and a chance to disappear. I can give you both. But I need you to decide now." Charlotte thought about the wine, the rent, the LinkedIn messages from former colleagues who'd stopped responding, the slow suffocation of a life that had stopped moving forward. She thought about her apartment that smelled like curry and her bank account that screamed every time she checked it. She thought about the fact that this man had tracked her down, learned her secrets, and still thought she was worth $2 million. "I have conditions." Ethan almost smiled. "Of course you do. I want legal protection, a contract that spells out exactly what happens if things go wrong. I want my own lawyer reviewing everything before I sign, and I want to know what you're not telling me, because there's always something. The contract will protect you. Your lawyer can review it. And what I'm not telling you is that my uncle probably had something to do with my accident." Ethan said it calmly, like he was discussing the weather. "I can't prove it yet. But if you dig into the company's finances, you'll find patterns that don't make sense. Money moving in ways it shouldn't. Contracts that benefit people who shouldn't be benefiting. My uncle has been positioning himself to take over for years. The marriage requirement is just the latest move." Charlotte felt her investigator instincts wake up, the part of her that had loved the puzzle of following money trails and finding the truth buried in spreadsheets. "You want me to investigate him. I want you to be my wife. If you happen to notice financial irregularities while you have access to company resources, that's your choice." Ethan held out his hand. "Do we have a deal, Miss Hayes?" She looked at his hand, suspended in the space between them, offering a future she couldn't predict and probably shouldn't trust. She shook it anyway. "We have a deal, Mr. Caldwell." The contract arrived the next morning, delivered by a lawyer who looked like she'd never smiled in her life and probably considered it a weakness. Charlotte spent 6 hours reviewing it with an attorney she couldn't afford but hired anyway, using the advance that had appeared in her bank account at midnight, $500,000 that made her physically dizzy when she checked the balance. The terms were exactly what Ethan had promised. 6 months. Public appearances as needed. Separate residences allowed if discreet. Financial settlement of $2 million upon divorce, with penalties if either party violated the terms early. There was also a clause she hadn't expected. Full access to Caldwell Industries' financial systems, justified as spousal review of household assets. Her lawyer had raised an eyebrow at that one. "This is unusual," she'd said. "Most prenuptial agreements restrict access to company finances. This is inviting it." Charlotte had signed anyway. 3 days later, she stood in a courthouse downtown wearing a dress she'd bought that morning, watching Ethan Caldwell sign his name to a marriage certificate with the same expression he'd probably used to approve quarterly earnings. The judge was efficient. The witnesses were strangers pulled from the hallway. The ceremony took 4 minutes. When it was done, Ethan's security guard took a single photo for the press release. Charlotte looked at it on James's phone, her face serious, Ethan's hand on hers, both of them looking like they were entering a merger negotiation instead of a marriage, which she supposed they were. "There's a car waiting," James said. "Press conference in 2 hours. You'll need to change." Charlotte looked at Ethan. "You're announcing this today?" "The board meets tomorrow morning. I need this public before they vote." He rolled toward the courthouse exit, pausing at the door. "My apartment is 15 minutes away. You can change there. After the press conference, we'll discuss logistics, how often we need to be seen together, what events require attendance, how to handle questions." "What about your family?" "They'll find out with everyone else." Ethan's voice was flat. "My uncle wanted a marriage. He's getting one, just not the way he expected." The car was a Mercedes, black and silent, with windows tinted dark enough to hide what Charlotte suspected was probably illegal in most states. She slid into the back seat, Ethan's wheelchair folding with practiced efficiency as James stored it in the trunk. The city slid past the windows, buildings she'd walked past 1,000 times, streets she'd navigated for years, all of it looking different now that she was sitting in the back of a car that cost more than she'd made in the last 2 years combined. "You're quiet." Ethan's voice pulled her back from the window. "I'm thinking about what I just did." "Having regrets?" "Wondering if I should be." He smiled slightly, the first genuine expression she'd seen from him. "That's the right answer." The apartment was in a building she'd passed before but never entered, the kind of place where doormen wore gloves and the elevator required a key. Ethan's place was on the top floor, all windows and clean lines, decorated like someone had hired a professional and then never touched anything. "Second bedroom is yours," he said, rolling toward what she assumed was his office. "Bathroom's stocked. There are clothes in the closet that should fit. My assistant guessed your size. If anything's wrong, she'll fix it." Charlotte walked to the bedroom, found a walk-in closet full of designer labels, all with the tags still on, all in her size. On the bed was a garment bag with a note, for the press conference. M. She unzipped it and found a suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to be. Navy blue, perfectly tailored, the kind of outfit that whispered money instead of shouting it. She put it on and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was unfamiliar, polished, professional, the kind of person who might actually belong in Ethan Caldwell's world. She'd spent 2 years disappearing. Now she was about to step in front of cameras and announce to the world that she existed again. The press conference was held in a hotel ballroom, cameras everywhere, reporters shouting questions before Ethan even reached the podium. Charlotte stood slightly behind him, her hand resting on the back of his chair, a gesture that looked supportive but felt like holding on to something stable in a storm. "I'll make this brief," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the noise. "I'm pleased to announce my marriage to Charlotte Hayes. We were married this morning in a private ceremony. I know this comes as a surprise, but Charlotte and I have been seeing each other quietly for several months. Recent events have made it clear that life is too short to wait for the perfect moment. We're looking forward to building our future together." The questions came like machine gun fire. "Miss Hayes, how did you meet?" "Mr. Caldwell, is this related to tomorrow's board meeting?" "Charlotte, what do you say to people who think this marriage is suspicious?" Ethan held up a hand. "We'll take 3 questions." He pointed at a reporter in the front row. "How long have you been together?" "Long enough to know what we want," Charlotte said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I understand the timing raises questions, but the truth is sometimes simple. We fell in love, and we decided not to wait." The lie tasted like metal in her mouth. "Second question. Mr. Caldwell, will this affect the board meeting tomorrow?" "My personal life and my professional responsibilities are separate matters. The board will make whatever decision they believe is best for the company." Third question, from a reporter near the back. "Miss Hayes, you left the Manhattan DA's office under controversial circumstances. Are you using this marriage to rehabilitate your reputation?" Charlotte felt Ethan's hand touch hers briefly. A warning, or support, she couldn't tell which. "My past is my past," she said. "I made mistakes and I paid for them. This marriage isn't about my career. It's about building a life with someone I respect and trust." The lies were getting easier. That probably should have worried her more than it did. Ethan wrapped up the conference, rolled away from the podium with Charlotte following, cameras flashing like lightning as they left. In the car, the silence felt heavy with everything they hadn't said. "You did well," Ethan finally said. "I lied to a room full of reporters. You played your role. That's what this is, a role we're both playing for the next 6 months." Charlotte looked at him. "Do you ever feel bad about it? The lying?" "I feel bad about a lot of things, Miss Hayes, but this isn't one of them." He met her eyes. "My uncle has been lying to me for months, positioning himself to take everything my father built. The board has been lying about their concerns, pretending this is about stability when it's about power. Everyone in that room today was lying about something. We're just better at it than most." The car pulled up to the apartment building. James helped Ethan with the wheelchair, and Charlotte followed them into the elevator, watching the numbers climb. "The board meets at 9 tomorrow morning," Ethan said as they entered the apartment. "I'll need you there." "Why?" "Because they'll want to see proof that this marriage is real, They'll want to see us together, see how we interact, look for cracks in the story. He rolled toward his office. Get some sleep, Miss Hayes. Tomorrow is when the real performance begins. Charlotte went to her room in an apartment that still didn't feel real, and lay on a bed that was too soft, wearing clothes that were too expensive, thinking about a marriage that was entirely fake. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. Welcome to the family. We should talk. Richard Caldwell. She deleted it without responding, but sleep didn't come easy. The boardroom of Caldwell Industries was designed to intimidate, 40 feet long, windows overlooking the city, a table made from a single piece of mahogany that had probably cost more than a house, 12 chairs, 11 of them filled with men in suits that fit too well. Charlotte sat in the 13th chair, added that morning, positioned next to Ethan at the head of the table. Richard Caldwell sat at the opposite end, smiling. Congratulations on your marriage, he said, voice warm as poisoned honey. Quite a surprise to all of us. I don't believe we've met formally, Mrs. Caldwell. The name hit her like a slap. She'd known it was coming, had practiced responding to it, but hearing it out loud in a room full of strangers made it real in a way the ceremony hadn't. Charlotte is fine, she said. Charlotte, then. Welcome to the family. I'm sure this has all been overwhelming. Whirlwind romance, sudden wedding, now thrust into the middle of corporate matters. I'm managing. Richard's smile widened. I'm sure you are. Your background as an investigator must help with… He paused delicately. Navigating complex situations. The threat was subtle but clear. I know who you are. I know what happened. I can use it. Ethan cut in, voice cold. Shall we begin? I believe we have a motion to discuss regarding company leadership. The board meeting proceeded with the mechanical efficiency of people who'd already made their decisions. Richard presented the motion, restructuring that would shift power to a new executive committee, reducing the chairman's authority, creating oversight that sounded protective but felt like a cage. Given recent concerns about leadership stability, Richard said, looking directly at Ethan, the board believes this structure provides necessary safeguards. Recent concerns, Ethan repeated. You mean my accident? I mean the challenges you've faced recovering from a traumatic event. No one doubts your capabilities, Ethan. We're simply ensuring the company has stable leadership regardless of… Another delicate pause. Personal circumstances. Charlotte watched the faces around the table. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked calculating. All of them looked like they'd already chosen sides. Ethan leaned forward. I appreciate the board's concern. However, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. This motion isn't about stability, it's about succession. My uncle has been positioning himself to take control of this company for years. The accident simply accelerated his timeline. That's a serious accusation, Richard said softly. It's an observation, one I'm prepared to defend with evidence if necessary. Ethan glanced at Charlotte, a look that lasted half a second but said everything. My marriage demonstrates long-term thinking. My recovery demonstrates resilience, and my leadership over the past 6 months, during which the company exceeded every quarterly projection, demonstrates capability. I'm not going anywhere. The vote was called. Charlotte watched hands rise, counted them silently. 7-5. The motion failed. Richard's smile never faltered, but something cold flashed in his eyes. Democracy in action, he said. Though I hope you understand, Ethan, that concerns about succession planning won't disappear just because you've gotten married. The board will continue to monitor the situation carefully. I'd expect nothing less. The meeting adjourned. Board members filed out, some nodding to Ethan, others avoiding eye contact entirely. Richard was the last to leave, pausing at the door. Charlotte, we should have lunch sometime. I'd love to hear more about your work with the DA's office. Such fascinating cases you must have investigated. He left before she could respond. Ethan waited until the room was empty, then let out a long breath. That went better than expected. He's not done, Charlotte said. No, he's just getting started. Ethan rolled toward the window, looking down at the city spreading out below them. But now we've bought time, 6 months to find proof of what he's done. 6 months to build a case that even the board can't ignore. And what am I supposed to do during these 6 months? Whatever you want. You have access to the company's financial systems. Use it. Dig into contracts, offshore accounts, payment histories. Find the pattern. He turned back to face her. You're good at this, Miss Hayes. That's why I chose you. Charlotte stood, walked to the window next to him. From this height, the city looked manageable. Problems reduced to the size of ants. I'm not doing this just for the money anymore, she said quietly. I know. That's what makes you dangerous. They stood in silence, two people bound by a contract that was starting to feel like something else, looking down at a city full of secrets neither of them had finished uncovering yet. Charlotte's phone buzzed. Another text from Richard. Lunch tomorrow, 1 p.m. I insist. She showed it to Ethan. He's testing you, Ethan said. Wants to see if you'll meet with him behind my back, wants to find leverage, wants to know if our marriage is real or strategic. What should I tell him? Tell him yes, have lunch, listen to whatever he offers. Ethan's voice was calm, calculated. Just remember who you're working for. Charlotte looked at him. Am I working for you, or am I working with you? That's a good question, Mrs. Caldwell. Maybe spend the next 6 months figuring out the answer. She left the boardroom, rode the elevator down 43 floors, walked out into a city that looked the same as it had yesterday, but felt completely different. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Mrs. Caldwell? A woman's voice, professional, slightly amused. This is Marcus Klein from the Financial Times. I was hoping to ask a few questions about your relationship with Ethan Caldwell. I've been researching the Meridian scandal, and I'm curious about the timing of your marriage relative to... Charlotte hung up. The calls would keep coming. The questions would keep coming. For the next 6 months, her life would be performance and investigation. Lies and truth tangled so tight, she'd stop being able to tell the difference. She'd signed up for this, taken the money, made the choice. Now she had to live with it. Charlotte walked to the subway, descended into the underground, and rode home to an apartment she'd be leaving soon for a life she didn't recognize yet. The train rattled through the dark, and she thought about Ethan's question. Working for him or working with him? She didn't have an answer, but she had 6 months to find one, and a feeling that by the time she did, everything she thought she knew about this arrangement would have changed. The train doors opened. Charlotte stepped out into the station, climbed the stairs back to street level, and walked toward an apartment that would stop being home as soon as she figured out where home was supposed to be now. Her phone buzzed one more time, a text from Ethan. Dinner at 8. We need to discuss the photographer following you. She looked around, suddenly aware of how exposed she was, how visible. Somewhere in the crowd of commuters heading home, someone was watching, recording, building a story that would fit whatever narrative paid best. Charlotte texted back, I'll be there, and walked into a life that had stopped being hers alone the moment she'd shaken hands with a man in a wheelchair who'd offered her money and called it a marriage. 6 months. That's what the contract said. She was starting to suspect it wouldn't be nearly enough time. The photographer turned out to be a freelancer working for 3 different tabloids, a gossip blog, and someone Charlotte suspected was Richard Caldwell himself. James identified him within an hour, had his equipment confiscated within 2, and by dinner time, the man had signed an agreement that would bankrupt him if he ever published a single image. Charlotte watched this happen from Ethan's apartment, sitting at a dining table that could seat 12 but only ever sat 2. You didn't have to destroy his career, she said. Ethan looked up from his laptop. I didn't destroy it. I redirected it. He'll make more money working for us than he ever would selling pictures to tabloids. Working for us? Someone's going to follow you anyway. Might as well be someone on payroll. He closed the laptop, rolled to the table. You need to get used to this, Charlotte. Privacy isn't something we have anymore. The best we can do is control the narrative. She'd moved into the apartment 3 days ago, bringing 2 suitcases and a plant she'd kept alive for 6 years out of spite. The plant now sat on the windowsill of her bedroom, looking as uncomfortable with the marble countertops and designer furniture as she felt. Your uncle called again, she said. And? I'm having lunch with him tomorrow, like you suggested. Ethan poured wine into 2 glasses, slid one across the table to her. What do you think he wants? To figure out if I'm a threat or an asset. To see if he can turn me against you. To offer me something I'd be stupid to refuse. And what will you say? Charlotte took a drink. The wine probably cost more than her security deposit used to be. I'll listen. I'll smile. I'll let him think he's smarter than me. Then I'll come back here and tell you everything. You're getting good at this. At lying? At surviving. Ethan's voice was quiet. There's a difference. They ate in silence for a while. Food prepared by a chef who came twice a day, left meals in warming drawers, and disappeared like a ghost. Charlotte still wasn't used to it, the invisible labor that made Ethan's life function smoothly. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You're going to anyway." "The accident. Do you really think your uncle was involved?" Ethan set down his fork carefully. The car's brake line had been cut. The police called it vandalism, said it was probably kids or someone with a grudge. But the timing was convenient, 2 days before a board meeting where I was going to propose expanding into European markets, a move that would have diluted Richard's influence significantly. That's not proof. No, it's pattern recognition, the same thing you do when you follow money trails. He met her eyes. Richard benefits every time something goes wrong for me. The accident put me in a wheelchair and made him look like the stable choice for leadership. This marriage was supposed to make me look desperate. Everything he does is designed to position himself as the solution to problems he creates. Charlotte thought about the files she'd been reviewing for the past 3 days, buried in spreadsheets during the hours when she couldn't sleep. Contracts that favored subsidiaries Richard had connections to. Payments that disappeared into offshore accounts with names that sounded legitimate but led nowhere. Money moving in circles that only made sense if someone was hiding something. "I found irregular payments going back 4 years," she said. "Small amounts, nothing that would trigger audits, but consistent. They're all routed through a company called Meridian Holdings." Ethan went very still. "Say that again?" "Meridian Holdings. It's registered in Delaware, has 3 board members I can't identify, and—" She stopped, seeing his expression. "What?" "Meridian was the name of your scandal, the case that destroyed your career." The wine suddenly tasted like ash in her mouth. "That's a coincidence." "I don't believe in coincidences." Ethan pulled his laptop back open, fingers moving fast. "Tell me everything about that case. Every detail you remember." Charlotte's hands had started shaking. She set down her glass before she could spill it. "I was investigating financial fraud at a real estate development company. My supervisor gave me a source, someone inside the company who was willing to talk. I built the entire case on their information, got warrants, prepared for indictments. Then the source recanted, said I'd coerced them, that everything they'd told me was fabricated. The case collapsed. The DA's office fired me to avoid a lawsuit. My supervisor retired 6 months later with a full pension." "And you never questioned why your supervisor would burn you like that?" "Every day. But I had no proof of anything except my own failure." Ethan turned the laptop around, showed her a screen full of corporate filings. "Meridian Holdings was incorporated 5 years ago. The development company you were investigating? They were acquired by Meridian 6 months after your case fell apart, for half their market value. Someone made a fortune on that deal." Charlotte stared at the screen, watching puzzle pieces slide into place. "You're saying my case was sabotaged on purpose, that someone wanted that company available for acquisition. I'm saying your career was collateral damage in a corporate takeover, and now payments from my company are going to the same entity that benefited from destroying you." Ethan's voice was hard. "How did your uncle find you, Charlotte? How did he know you'd be desperate enough to accept this arrangement?" "I thought you found me." "I did, but I spent weeks researching options, running background checks, building profiles. Richard suggested you 48 hours after the board announced their marriage requirement. He had your name ready. He wanted you here." The apartment suddenly felt very small. Charlotte stood, walked to the window, looked down at the city lights that made everything look clean from a distance. "He set me up," she said quietly. "He destroyed my career 5 years ago, and now he's using me to destroy yours. Or he thinks he is." Ethan rolled to the window beside her. "But he made a mistake. He assumed you'd stay bought, that $2 million would be enough to keep you loyal to the money instead of the truth." "How do you know it isn't?" "Because you're still here. Because you could have taken the advance and disappeared, could have gone to Richard the moment you found those payments and sold him whatever he wanted to know. But you didn't." Ethan looked at her reflection in the glass. "You're not motivated by money, Charlotte. You're motivated by being right, by solving the puzzle. That's why he chose you, and that's why he's going to lose. Charlotte pressed her forehead against the cold glass. I don't know who to trust anymore. Then don't trust anyone. Verify everything. Follow the money until it leads somewhere we can use. His voice softened slightly. But if it helps, I'm not your enemy. We're both trapped in the same game. Might as well play it together. She turned to look at him, really look at him for the first time since this started. Ethan Caldwell wasn't handsome in the conventional way, but there was something compelling about him, something in the careful control he maintained over everything except his eyes, which looked tired and angry and determined all at once. What happens when the 6 months are over? She asked. We get divorced. You get your money. You disappear if you want to. And if I don't want to? Ethan held her gaze. Then we figure out what comes next when we get there. Her phone buzzed. Text from Richard. Looking forward to lunch tomorrow. There's so much to discuss. Charlotte showed it to Ethan. Should I still go? Absolutely. He wants to play games? We'll play better. Ethan rolled back to the table, pulled up a new file on his laptop. But first you need to know what you're walking into. Richard doesn't make social calls. He's going to offer you something. Information, money, protection. Something that sounds like he's helping but really puts you in his debt. What should I do? Listen, take notes if you can do it subtly. And remember that everything he says is designed to manipulate you. Ethan looked up from the screen. He's good at this, Charlotte. He's been playing corporate politics since before you were born. Don't underestimate him. I won't. And Charlotte? He waited until she met his eyes. Whatever he offers you, whatever he threatens you with, tell me. Not because I own you or control you, but because we're stronger if we're honest with each other. That's the only advantage we have. She nodded, not trusting her voice. That night, she lay in her expensive bed in her borrowed room and thought about a case that had destroyed her career 5 years ago. Thought about a supervisor who'd fed her false information and then hung her out to dry. Thought about a development company that had been acquired for pennies on the dollar by an entity that now appeared to be funneling money out of Caldwell Industries. She thought about Richard Caldwell's smile and Ethan's wheelchair and a marriage certificate that was supposed to be fake but was starting to feel like the only real thing in her life. Sleep came eventually, restless and full of dreams about brake lines and corporate filings and money disappearing into offshore accounts that led nowhere. The restaurant Richard chose was the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu and probably wouldn't let you in without a reservation made 6 months in advance. Charlotte arrived exactly on time, wearing another suit from the closet that had appeared in her room, carrying a purse that cost more than her old car. Richard was already seated, looking relaxed and confident in a corner booth that offered privacy and a view of the entire room. He stood when she approached, kissed her cheek like they were family. Charlotte, you look lovely. Marriage agrees with you. She slid into the booth across from him. Thank you for the invitation. Of course. I realized after the board meeting that we'd barely spoken. That seems wrong, given that you're family now. He signaled the waiter, ordered wine without asking her preference. How are you settling in? The apartment must be quite different from what you're used to. It's an adjustment, I'm sure. Ethan's life can be overwhelming for someone from outside our world. All the scrutiny, the expectations, the constant performance. Richard leaned back, studying her. Tell me, how did you two really meet? The official story is charming, but I'm curious about the truth. Charlotte sipped her water, buying time. We met through mutual connections, started talking. Things developed from there. Mutual connections? How vague. Richard smiled. You're a smart woman, Charlotte. Too smart to have fallen for a fairy tale romance with a man in a wheelchair who needed a wife to keep his board from mutinying. So let's skip the performance and talk honestly. What did he offer you? I don't know what you mean. Money, I assume. Probably a significant amount given your financial situation. Maybe also a chance to rebuild your reputation after the Meridian disaster. He said it casually, like discussing the weather. I know all about that case, by the way. The supervisor who betrayed you, the source who recanted, the career you lost. Terrible business. You deserved better. The waiter arrived with wine. Charlotte waited until he left before responding. Why are you bringing this up? Because I want you to understand something. Richard leaned forward, voice dropping to a confidential murmur. Ethan is using you. He needed a wife quickly, needed someone smart enough to play the role convincingly, but desperate enough to accept his terms. He found you, offered you money, and now you're trapped in an arrangement that will end badly for you no matter how it plays out. You seem very concerned about my welfare. I am. Because, unlike my nephew, I actually care about the people who get caught in the crossfire of his ambitions. Richard poured wine into both their glasses. Ethan is brilliant, I won't deny that, but he's also ruthless. He'll use you for whatever purpose he has in mind, and when you're no longer useful, he'll discard you just like he's discarded everyone else who got too close. Charlotte took a drink, letting the silence stretch. Richard wanted her off balance, wanted her questioning everything. She'd seen this technique before in interrogations: build doubt, offer sympathy, position yourself as the only person telling the truth. What do you want, Richard? I want to help you, and I want to help Ethan, even if he doesn't see it that way. He set down his glass. My nephew is self-destructing. The accident damaged him in ways that go beyond the physical. He's becoming paranoid, seeing enemies everywhere, making decisions based on fear instead of strategy. The board is losing confidence. The company is suffering. Something has to change. And you think you're that change. I think I'm someone who can guide the company through this transition without destroying everything my brother built. Richard's voice carried genuine emotion now, or a convincing performance of it. I loved Ethan's father, watched him build Caldwell Industries from nothing. I won't let his son's pride tear it all down. The food arrived. Dishes Charlotte didn't order, but Richard had clearly pre-selected. She picked at an appetizer that probably cost $50, watching Richard's face for tells. You still haven't told me what you want from me, she said. I want you to be honest with me about what Ethan is planning, what he's investigating, what he's asked you to do. Richard met her eyes. I know he's given you access to the company's financial systems. I know he suspects me of being involved in his accident. I know he's using you to dig for evidence that doesn't exist. All I'm asking is that you tell me what you find before he uses it to damage the company irreparably. You want me to spy on my husband. I want you to protect yourself. Because when this ends, and it will end, Charlotte, you'll need someone on your side. Ethan won't protect you when the marriage dissolves. He'll pay you off and move on. But I can offer you something more permanent, a position with the company. Real work, using your actual skills. A chance to rebuild your career legitimately instead of through a sham marriage. Charlotte set down her fork. That's a generous offer. It's a fair offer. You're talented, Charlotte. The Meridian case was sabotage, not failure. With the right support, you could be exceptional. He pulled a business card from his pocket, slid it across the table. Think about it. You don't have to answer now, but when you realize that Ethan is using you the same way everyone else has used you, call me. I'll make sure you land on your feet. The card sat between them like a landmine. Charlotte picked it up, slid it into her purse. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. Richard signaled for the check. One more thing. There's a gala next week, annual charity event for children's hospitals. Very high profile, lots of press. The board will expect to see you and Ethan there together, playing the happy couple. I'd suggest you practice your performance. People will be watching closely. I'll keep that in mind. Richard paid, walked her to the door, kissed her cheek again in a gesture that felt like marking territory. Welcome to the family, Charlotte. I hope you survive it. She walked 3 blocks before finding a quiet corner to call Ethan. How did it go? He answered immediately. He offered me a job, wanted me to spy on you in exchange for career rehabilitation and company protection. Did you accept? I took his card. Silence on the line. Then, good. That's exactly what I would have done. Charlotte leaned against a building, watching pedestrians flow past like water around a stone. He knows you suspect him, knows you've given me access to financial systems. He's not even trying to hide it, because he thinks he's already won, that you'll choose security over loyalty. Ethan's voice was calm, analytical. Did he say anything about the gala? Mentioned it, said people would be watching. They will be, which means we need to look convincing. Can you be ready by 8 tonight? For what? Practice. If we're going to perform a marriage in front of 500 people, we should probably figure out how to look like we can stand each other. There was a pause. Also, we need to talk about what you found in the Meridian files. I've been digging into the acquisition. It gets worse. Charlotte closed her eyes. How much worse? The kind of worse that means we're not just fighting for control of a company anymore. We're fighting something bigger. His voice dropped. Come home, Charlotte. We have work to do. She hung up, stood for a moment in the middle of a city that suddenly felt less familiar. Richard's card sat in her purse like a bomb waiting to detonate. Ethan's voice echoed in her head, calling his apartment home like it was supposed to mean something. The cab ride back took 20 minutes through traffic that barely moved. Charlotte used the time to review everything Richard had said, looking for the lies hidden inside the concern, the manipulation wrapped in sympathy. He'd been too prepared, known too much, offered her exactly what she needed at exactly the right moment, which meant he'd been planning this conversation long before she'd agreed to lunch. James met her in the lobby, rode the elevator up with her in silence. Ethan was in his office, surrounded by files and laptop screens, looking like he hadn't moved since she'd left. Tell me everything, he said. She did. Every word, every gesture, every expression on Richard's face. Ethan listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad in handwriting that was precise and controlled. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. He's scared, Ethan finally said. He didn't seem scared. That's the point. Richard doesn't make offers like that unless he's worried about what you might find. The job, the protection, the sympathy about Meridian, that's all defense. He's trying to neutralize you before you become a real threat. Maybe he's just trying to help. Ethan looked at her. Do you believe that? Charlotte thought about Richard's smile, his careful words, the business card that sat in her purse like a promise and a threat. No, neither do I. Ethan rolled to a filing cabinet, pulled out a folder. I've been looking into the Meridian acquisition. The development company you investigated? It was bought by Meridian Holdings for $40 million. 2 years later, Meridian sold it to a Chinese investment group for $200 million. Someone made a $160 million profit. That's not illegal. Risky, maybe, but not illegal. It is if the acquisition was based on insider information obtained through corporate sabotage, and it's definitely illegal if the profits were used to fund a campaign to destabilize Caldwell Industries from the inside. He opened the folder, spread documents across his desk. Look at the dates. Meridian Holdings Incorporated 5 years ago. Same month your case collapsed. First payment from Caldwell Industries to Meridian Holdings appears 6 months later, right after Richard joined the board. Payments have continued monthly ever since, increasing each year. Charlotte moved closer, scanning the documents. What are the payments listed as? Consulting fees, strategic advisory services, all perfectly legitimate categories for business expenses. Except Meridian Holdings doesn't provide any actual services. Not that I can find. It's a shell company designed to move money, and Richard is one of 3 people who controls it. Ethan pulled up another file on his laptop. I can't prove it yet, but I think Richard orchestrated your entire scandal. He needed that development company available for acquisition, needed it cheap, needed the investigation to collapse before any real damage was done. So he used your supervisor, who he'd probably been cultivating for years, to feed you false information, let you build a case, then pulled the rug out and let you take the fall. Charlotte felt sick. Why would my supervisor agree to that? Check his retirement package. I'm betting you'll find a consulting contract with Meridian Holdings, or a mysterious windfall right around the time he left the DA's office. She already knew what she'd find, but she pulled up the records anyway on her phone. Former supervisor, retired 6 months after the scandal. Consulting income reported from Meridian Holdings, she said quietly. $200,000 a year for 3 years. He sold you for $600,000 and early retirement, and Richard got a company worth $200 million for less than a quarter of its value. Ethan's voice was hard. That's who we're fighting, Charlotte. Someone who destroys careers and companies like it's a hobby. Someone who orchestrated a 5-year plan that put you exactly where he needed you when he needed you there. Charlotte sat down because her legs had stopped working properly. He planned this from the beginning. The scandal, the acquisition, everything. He knew eventually he'd need to force you into a marriage, and he wanted someone desperate enough to accept but smart enough to be useful. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions because they needed the money too badly. Except he miscalculated, because you're not desperate anymore. You're angry. Ethan met her eyes. Anger is more useful than desperation. It's focused. It's sustainable, and it makes people willing to burn things down to get to the truth. What do? We play along. You keep Richard's card. You let him think he's succeeding. Meanwhile, you keep digging into the financials, and I'll work on the board. We need more than just payment records. We need proof that Richard orchestrated the accident, proof that he's been embezzling from the company, proof that he destroyed your career as part of a larger scheme. Ethan closed the laptop. And we need to be ready for the gala, because Richard was right about one thing. People will be watching. This is our chance to show them that we're not just a strategic arrangement, we're a united front. How do we do that? We practice. He rolled away from the desk. Clear some space in the living room. If we're going to convince 500 people that this marriage is real, we need to look comfortable together. Right now, we look like strangers who signed a contract. Charlotte moved furniture while Ethan queued up a playlist, classical music, the kind that played at fancy events where people wore tuxedos and wrote six-figure checks for charity. When the space was ready, he positioned himself in the center of the room. Come here. She walked over, stopped a few feet away. Closer. If you stand that far away at the gala, everyone will notice. Charlotte moved closer. Ethan reached out, took her hand, pulled her gently until she was standing next to his wheelchair. This is the position we'll be in most of the night, he said. You standing beside me, my hand on yours or your arm. It needs to look natural, like we've done this 1,000 times. We haven't done it once. Then we practice until it feels normal. His hand rested on hers, warm and steady. Tell me something true, something that isn't about the case or the contract or any of this. Why? Because if we're going to lie convincingly, we need some truth to build it on. So tell me something real. Charlotte looked down at their hands. I miss my apartment. It was small and smelled like curry, and the neighbor upstairs played drums at 2 a.m. But it was mine. I knew how the locks worked and which floorboards creaked and where the sun came through the windows in the morning. This place is beautiful, but it doesn't feel like mine. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I miss walking, not because the wheelchair is limiting. I've adapted to that. But because there's something about choosing to move without having to think about angles and accessibility and whether there's an elevator. I miss deciding to go somewhere and just going. That's honest. That's the point. He squeezed her hand gently. When we're at the gala, people will look for cracks. They'll watch how we move together, how we respond to each other, whether we seem comfortable. The only way to fake comfort is to find something real underneath the performance. They practiced for an hour. How to stand together, how to move through a room, how to respond when someone approached them. Ethan showed her where to put her hand when photographers appeared, how to lean in when he spoke so it looked intimate instead of strategic. You're good at this, Charlotte said during a break. I've been performing my whole life, performing competence, performing confidence, performing recovery after the accident. This is just another role. He looked up at her. But it's easier with you than I expected. Because I'm good at lying? Because you're honest about the lying. Most people pretend they're being genuine while they perform. You acknowledge that it's all theater. It's refreshing. Charlotte's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Saw you at lunch today. Interesting choice of company. We should talk. MK. She showed it to Ethan. Marcus Klein from the Financial Times. They called me before asking about the Meridian scandal. Ignore it. Journalists are fishing for a story. If we give them anything, they'll run with it. What if they already have a story? What if Richard is feeding them information? Ethan considered this. Then we need our own journalists, someone who'll run a counter-narrative when the time comes. He pulled up a contact on his phone. I know someone at the Wall Street Journal, investigative reporter, hates corporate fraud, owes me a favor. If we can give her proof of what Richard's done, she'll run it. That's a big if. Everything about this is a big if. He rolled toward the window, looked out at the city lights. 6 months seemed like a long time when we started this. Now I'm wondering if it'll be enough. Charlotte joined him at the window, standing close enough that their reflections merged in the glass. What happens if we don't find enough proof? If Richard wins and you lose the company? Then I lose the company, and you get your divorce settlement and disappear like we planned. And if we do find proof? Ethan turned to look at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression was something other than controlled. Then we burn his whole operation to the ground and figure out what comes next." They stood in silence, watching the city that held secrets they were still uncovering, fighting a war that had started long before either of them realized they were combatants. Charlotte's phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Richard. "Hope you enjoyed lunch. Remember, the offer stands whenever you're ready. You don't have to fight a losing battle." She deleted it without showing Ethan. Some battles, she was starting to realize, were worth fighting even when you weren't sure you could win. Some lies were worth maintaining until you found the truth underneath. And some contracts turned into something else entirely when you stopped reading the fine print and started paying attention to the person across the table. "Same time tomorrow?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. "Practice?" "Investigation. We have 4 days until the gala. I want to know everything about Meridian Holdings by then. Every transaction, every board member, every connection to Richard. If we're going to perform a marriage in public, we might as well do something useful in private." Charlotte nodded, headed toward her room, stopped at the door. "Ethan?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for telling me the truth about Meridian. You could have kept it to yourself." "I could have, but then you'd still be wondering if I was using you the same way Richard used you." He met her eyes across the room. "I'm not interested in using people, Charlotte. I'm interested in finding partners worth trusting. There's a difference." She went to bed thinking about that difference, about trust that had to be earned and partnerships that started as contracts, about a man in a wheelchair who'd offered her money and was giving her something more valuable instead. A chance to understand exactly how she'd been destroyed, and by whom, and why. The city lights filtered through her window, casting shadows that moved with the wind. Somewhere out there, Richard Caldwell was planning his next move. Somewhere in the digital files she hadn't finished reading, evidence waited to be found. Charlotte fell asleep with her laptop open, financial records scrolling across the screen, hunting for the pattern that would make everything make sense. 4 days until the gala. 4 days to practice being married to a man she barely knew. 4 days to find proof that would either save them both or destroy what little they'd built. She dreamed about break lines and business cards, about lunch in expensive restaurants and contracts that looked legitimate until you read them closely enough to see the trap hidden in the terms. When she woke up, Ethan was already in his office, surrounded by files, hunting the same ghost she was chasing. They had work to do. The evidence arrived on the 3rd day, buried in a file Charlotte almost missed. She'd been awake since 4 in the morning, cross-referencing payment records with corporate filings, following money trails that twisted through shell companies and offshore accounts. Her eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, and she was about to give up when she noticed something odd about a transaction dated 6 months before Ethan's accident. A payment of $50,000 from Caldwell Industries to a company called Apex Automotive Services, listed as fleet maintenance, which would have been normal, except Caldwell Industries didn't have a fleet. The company used car services and executive drivers, outsourced everything. Charlotte pulled up Apex's registration. Delaware Corporation, incorporated 4 years ago, dissolved 2 months after Ethan's accident. 3 board members, all names she didn't recognize until she ran them through a background check and found that one of them, Daniel Torres, had a sister who worked in Richard Caldwell's personal office. Her hand started shaking. She pulled up more files, searching for any other mentions of Apex. Found 2 more payments, both labeled fleet maintenance, both made in the months leading up to the accident. Total, $130,000 for services that were never rendered to vehicles that didn't exist. She was still staring at the screen when Ethan rolled into the kitchen at 6:30, already dressed, looking like he'd been awake as long as she had. "You found something," he said. Not a question. Charlotte turned her laptop around, showed him the payments, watched his face as he read, saw the moment understanding hit. "Apex Automotive," he said quietly. "That's how he paid for it." "We don't know that for sure. This could be—" "Charlotte." He looked up at her. "Apex dissolved 8 weeks after my brake line was cut. The company exists just long enough to receive payments and disappear. One of the board members has direct connections to Richard's office. This isn't coincidence. This is evidence." She closed the laptop, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. If this is real, if Richard really did orchestrate your accident, then he's already committed to this path, which makes him more dangerous, not less. Ethan rolled to the window, looked out at the city waking up. We can't go to the police with this. Not yet. It's circumstantial at best, and Richard has enough connections to bury it before it goes anywhere. So what do? We keep digging, find more connections, build a stronger case, and we get through tonight without letting him know we're close. Ethan turned back to face her. The gala is in 12 hours. You ready? Charlotte thought about the dress hanging in her closet. Midnight blue, floor length, probably cost more than her first car. Thought about 500 people watching her pretend to be in love with a man she'd married for money. Thought about Richard Caldwell's smile and the evidence that suggested he'd tried to kill his own nephew. No, she said, but I'll do it anyway. Ethan almost smiled. That's the spirit. The rest of the morning was a blur of preparation. A stylist arrived at 10, bringing makeup and hairpins and opinions about Charlotte's eyebrows. A photographer came at 11 to take photos for the event's social media, candid shots that were anything but candid, carefully posed to look spontaneous. Charlotte sat still while someone painted her face, stood quiet while they pinned her hair, smiled on command while cameras flashed. Through it all, she felt like she was watching herself from a distance, some other woman playing the role, while the real Charlotte Hayes hid somewhere deep inside, still trying to process the fact that her entire life had been collateral damage in someone else's corporate war. You're thinking too loud, Ethan said during a break between photos. They were alone in the living room, waiting for the photographer to change lenses. Charlotte stood by the window in her dress, feeling overdressed and underprepared. I'm thinking about Daniel Torres, she said, the board member from Apex with connections to Richard's office. I want to talk to him. He won't talk to you, and if you approach him, he'll warn Richard that we're investigating. So we do nothing? We do what we came here to do. We perform. We smile. We let Richard think he's winning. Ethan adjusted his tie. Black silk, perfectly knotted, despite the fact that his hands had been shaking slightly all morning. Charlotte had noticed but hadn't mentioned it. Tomorrow, we can figure out our next move. Tonight, we just survive. The photographer returned. More poses, more smiles, more performance. Charlotte stood behind Ethan's wheelchair, her hand on his shoulder, both of them looking at the camera like they'd chosen this, like they wanted to be here. When it was finally over and everyone had left, Charlotte collapsed on the couch, still in her dress, too tired to change. I hate this, she said to the ceiling. Which part? All of it. The lying, the performing, the cameras. The fact that we found evidence of attempted murder and we have to go to a party and pretend everything's fine. Ethan rolled over, stopped beside the couch. You want to know what I hate? I hate that I brought you into this. That I offered you money to enter a war you didn't start. That Richard destroyed your career 5 years ago, and now he's using you again, and I'm complicit in it because I chose you specifically because you were vulnerable. Charlotte sat up, looked at him. You didn't force me. I made my choice. You made a choice based on limited information. If you'd known Richard had orchestrated the Meridian scandal, would you still have agreed? She thought about it. About the apartment that smelled like curry and the bank account that screamed and the $2 million that had seemed like salvation. About the fact that finding the truth about Meridian had become more important than the money. That somewhere in the past 2 weeks she'd stopped thinking about escape and started thinking about justice. Yes, she said, I still would have agreed. Because now I have a chance to make him pay for what he did. That's worth more than the money ever was. Ethan studied her face. You mean that? I mean that. Then we're in this together. Whatever happens tonight, whatever Richard throws at us, we face it as a team, not as a fake marriage or a business arrangement, as partners. Charlotte stood, smoothed down her dress. Partners who are about to walk into a room full of people who want to see us fail. Those are the best kind of partners, Ethan said, the ones who have nothing left to lose. The car arrived at 7. James drove, silent and efficient, navigating through traffic that barely moved. Charlotte watched the city slide past the tinted windows, tried to calm her breathing, failed. You're nervous, Ethan observed. I'm terrified. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let it show. The gala was held at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, a building that looked like it had been designed to intimidate. Red carpet stretched from the curb to the entrance, photographers lined up on both sides, waiting for their shots. Charlotte could see other couples emerging from cars, women in designer gowns, men in tuxedos, everyone looking comfortable in their wealth. Remember, Ethan said as James opened the door, they're all performing too. Nobody here is who they pretend to be. We're just more honest about the lying. Charlotte stepped out first, then waited while James helped Ethan with the wheelchair. The moment the cameras spotted them, the flashes started, blinding and relentless. She moved to Ethan's side automatically, her hand finding his shoulder, both of them pausing for photos like they'd done this 100 times. Mr. Caldwell, over here. Charlotte, look this way. How does it feel to be married? Ethan smiled, waved, said nothing. Charlotte followed his lead, kept her expression pleasant and neutral. Didn't react when someone shouted a question about the Meridian scandal. Inside, the ballroom was exactly what she'd expected. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, champagne fountains, hundreds of people who all looked like they belonged here. A string quartet played in the corner, music that was pretty and forgettable. Ethan? A woman in a red dress approached, arms outstretched. And this must be Charlotte. I'm Margaret Chen, on the hospital board. We're so thrilled you both could make it. Introductions followed, a blur of names and faces and hands to shake. Charlotte smiled until her face hurt, made small talk until her voice sounded fake even to herself, stood beside Ethan's wheelchair like she'd been born to the role. Richard found them an hour in, appearing at Charlotte's elbow with a champagne glass and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The happy couple, he said. You both look wonderful. Very convincing. Uncle Richard? Ethan's voice was cordial, carefully neutral. Enjoying the evening? Immensely. Though I have to say, I'm curious about something. Richard turned to Charlotte. Have you given any thought to our conversation? The offer I made? Charlotte felt Ethan's hand tighten slightly on the armrest, the only sign he'd heard. I'm still considering it, she said smoothly. It was generous. I'm glad you think so, because I'd hate for you to make a decision you'd regret. Richard's eyes shifted to Ethan. The board is meeting again next month. There are concerns about the European expansion. Some members feel it's too aggressive given recent instability in leadership. I thought you should know. I appreciate the heads up. Of course, we're family after all. We should look out for each other. Richard raised his glass. To family, and to marriages that serve their purpose. He walked away before either of them could respond. He knows, Charlotte said quietly. He suspects. There's a difference. Ethan rolled toward the edge of the room where they could talk without being overheard. The European expansion comment was a test. He's trying to see if we'll panic, make a mistake, give him ammunition to use against us. What do? We dance. Charlotte blinked. What? There's a dance floor. People are dancing. We should dance. Ethan looked up at her. I can't stand, but I can lead from here if you trust me. I don't know how to. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. He extended his hand. Come on, Mrs. Caldwell. Let's give them something to talk about. Charlotte took his hand, let him pull her close. The chair rolled smoothly across the floor, finding a spot near the edge where they wouldn't collide with other couples. Ethan's hand rested on her waist, the other holding hers, and slowly they began to move. Not quite dancing, but close enough, swaying to music that was too slow and too sweet. This is insane, Charlotte murmured. This is strategy. Everyone's watching. They expect us to hide, to stay on the sidelines. Instead, we're dancing. It throws off their narrative. She looked down at him, at the concentration on his face as he navigated the wheelchair through the crowd, at the way his hand held hers like it mattered. Why are you really doing this? She asked. The dance? Because Richard said our marriage serves its purpose. I want to prove him wrong. And what purpose does it serve, really? Ethan met her eyes. Originally, survival. Keeping the company, beating the board, winning the war. But somewhere in the last 2 weeks, it started serving a different purpose. It started being about finding someone who understands that everything is performance, except the moments when it isn't. Charlotte's throat felt tight. That's the wine talking. I haven't had any wine. This is just honesty. He spun the chair gently, turning them in a slow circle. You asked me earlier if I regret bringing you into this. I don't. You're the first person in 5 years who hasn't treated me like I'm broken. You look at me like I'm a problem to solve, and I look at you like you're an asset worth protecting. That's not romance, but it's something real. Ethan, I'm not asking for anything, Charlotte. I'm just telling you that when this 6 months is over and the contract expires, I'm not going to want you to disappear. I'm going to want to figure out what comes next. And I think you want that too, even if you're not ready to admit it. Before she could respond, someone cleared their throat nearby. They turned to find a woman with a press badge and a camera. Sorry to interrupt, Sarah Mitchell, Wall Street Journal. Mr. Caldwell, I was hoping to get a quote about the rumors of internal restructuring at Caldwell Industries. Ethan's expression shifted instantly, back to the controlled mask he wore in public. No restructuring planned. The company is performing well across all metrics. And the board meeting next month? Routine business. Nothing noteworthy. Sarah's eyes shifted to Charlotte. Mrs. Caldwell, how are you finding life in the spotlight? It must be quite different from your previous work. Charlotte recognized the trap, the question designed to make her defensive, to get her to say something that could be spun into a headline. It's an adjustment, but I'm learning that most things worth doing are difficult at first. Including marriage? Including everything. Sarah smiled, made a note. One more question. There are rumors that you're investigating Caldwell Industries' finances. Any truth to that? The room suddenly felt very cold. Charlotte kept her expression calm, her voice steady. I review household finances like any spouse would. If that's investigation, then everyone with a joint bank account is an investigator. But given your background with the Manhattan DA's office, my background is exactly that, background. I'm not with the DA's office anymore, and I'm not investigating anything. Charlotte met Sarah's eyes. I'm simply trying to build a life with my husband. Is that newsworthy? Sarah studied her for a moment, then nodded. I suppose not. Thank you both for your time. She left. Charlotte's hands were shaking. Ethan noticed, covered one of her hands with his. You did well, he said quietly. She knows, or suspects. Sarah's smart. She's been following corporate fraud cases for years. Of course she suspects something. Ethan glanced around the ballroom. But suspicion isn't proof, and we didn't give her anything she can use. Yet, he agreed. They stayed another hour, made more small talk, smiled for more photos, performed marriage for an audience that judged every gesture. By the time they left, Charlotte's feet hurt from her heels, and her face hurt from smiling, and her chest hurt from breathing in a dress that was too tight. In the car, they sat in silence. James drove, and Charlotte watched the city lights blur past, thought about everything that had happened in one night. Richard's veiled threats, the dance that felt too real, Sarah Mitchell's questions that cut too close to truth. He's going to escalate, she said finally. Ethan didn't ask who she meant. Probably. The gala was his way of testing our defenses. Now that he knows we're solid publicly, he'll try other approaches, financial pressure, board manipulation, media leaks, whatever he thinks will break us. What if it works? Then we adapt. That's what we've been doing since this started. He looked at her. You were right earlier. This is insane. Everything about this arrangement is insane, but I think that's why it's working. We're both too stubborn to quit, too angry to give up, and too invested to walk away. Charlotte leaned her head back against the seat. I found something else today, while you were getting ready. What? Another payment to Apex Automotive. Made 2 weeks before the accident, $75,000. But this one wasn't labeled fleet maintenance, it was labeled consulting services. She pulled out her phone, showed him the screenshot she'd taken. Someone got sloppy, or confident. They used the same account but changed the description. Ethan studied the image. Consulting services for what? That's what I want to find out. Because if we can prove that payment was connected to the accident, if we can establish intent and planning, then we have him. Not just for embezzlement or corporate fraud, for attempted murder. The car pulled up to their building. James helped Ethan with the wheelchair, and they rode the elevator up in silence, both of them processing what they'd found, what it meant, what came next. Inside the apartment, Charlotte kicked off her heels and collapsed on the couch, still wearing the midnight blue dress that had cost a fortune and felt like a costume. I need to contact Daniel Torres, she said to the ceiling. We talked about this. I know what we talked about, but we're running out of time. The board meets in 3 weeks. If Richard is planning another move, we need to know now. She sat up, looked at Ethan. Let me approach Torres, quietly, off the record. I can use my old credentials, make it seem like I'm investigating on behalf of a client. He doesn't need to know the client is you. If he tells Richard, Then we're exposed early instead of later. But if he doesn't, if I can get him to talk, we might finally have something concrete. Charlotte stood, started pacing. I've done this before, Ethan. This was my job. Getting people to talk, following evidence, building cases. Let me do what I'm good at. Ethan watched her pace, his expression unreadable. You're not doing this for the money anymore. No. You're doing this because you need to know, because Richard destroyed your career and you want to understand why, because solving this puzzle is more important than the settlement. Charlotte stopped pacing. Is that a problem? No, it's just an observation. He rolled toward his office. If you're going to contact Torres, do it carefully. Use a burner phone, meet somewhere public but not too public, record everything if you can do it legally. And Charlotte? Yeah? Don't go alone. Take James. I trust him, and I need to know you're safe. She nodded, felt something warm spread through her chest at his concern. Okay. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we figure out how to approach Torres without tipping off Richard. Tonight, we just survived the gala. That's enough. Charlotte went to her room, peeled off the expensive dress, stood in the shower until the hot water ran cold. When she finally climbed into bed, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Nice performance tonight. Almost believed it myself. But we both know the truth. You're investigating something you shouldn't be. Walk away while you still can. This is your only warning. No signature, no name. But Charlotte knew exactly who it was from. She deleted the message, turned off her phone, and lay in the dark thinking about warnings that came too late, threats that confirmed you were on the right track, and marriages that started as lies but were becoming the most honest thing in her life. Across the apartment, Ethan was probably still awake, probably still reviewing files, probably still hunting the same ghost she was chasing. Tomorrow they'd plan their approach to Daniel Torres. Tomorrow they'd dig deeper into Apex Automotive and Meridian Holdings, and all the connections that linked Richard to 5 years of calculated destruction. Tonight, she just needed to sleep. But sleep was difficult when you'd spent the evening dancing with your fake husband and realizing somewhere between the champagne and the cameras that the feelings you were performing were starting to become real. Charlotte stared at the ceiling, counting the minutes until morning, trying not to think about the way Ethan's hand had felt on her waist or the way he'd looked at her when he said he didn't want her to disappear. This was supposed to be simple. 6 months, $2 million, a clean exit. Nothing about this was simple anymore. She must have slept eventually because she woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee brewing. Charlotte pulled on clothes, walked to the kitchen, found Ethan already at the table surrounded by files and looking like he'd been up for hours. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Coffee's ready. I've been mapping out Torres's connections. You should see this." Charlotte poured coffee, joined him at the table. Spread across the surface were documents, photographs, a hand-drawn chart showing relationships between companies and people. Torres worked for a private security firm before joining Apex's board, Ethan said, pointing to a line on the chart. The same firm that Richard's office used for executive protection 3 years ago. They know each other. They've worked together. This wasn't random selection. Richard specifically recruited Torres for this. So we need Torres to flip, to testify that Richard hired him for the accident. That's not going to happen. Torres has too much to lose and Richard has too much leverage. Ethan pulled up another file. But we don't need Torres to confess. We just need him to make a mistake, to give us something we can verify independently that ties him directly to Richard and the accident. Charlotte studied the chart, following the lines of connection. What if we make him think we already have proof? What if we confront him with the Apex payments and see how he reacts? That's risky. If he calls our bluff, then we're no worse off than we are now. But if he panics, if he reaches out to Richard or tries to cover his tracks, we follow the trail and see where it leads. Ethan looked at her. You really want to do this? I really want to finish what we started, even if it means taking risks. She met his eyes. You said we're partners. Partners take risks together. Partners also protect each other, which is why James goes with you when you meet Torres. Agreed. Ethan reached for his phone, made a call. James, I need you to set up a meeting. Daniel Torres. Tell him Charlotte Hayes wants to discuss some irregularities in Apex Automotive's records. Make it sound official, like she's investigating on behalf of a client. Don't mention my name. He listened for a moment, then hung up. James will handle it. He's good at making things sound legitimate without actually lying. How long do we have? Until the board meeting? 3 weeks. Until Richard makes his next move? Could be tomorrow, could be next month. We're operating on his timeline, not ours. Charlotte finished her coffee, stood to refill it. I got a text last night, after the gala, warning me to stop investigating. Ethan went very still. Show me. I deleted it, but it was clear enough. Someone knows we're digging and they want us to stop. Richard? Or someone working for him? She turned to face Ethan. We're getting close. He wouldn't bother warning us if we weren't a real threat. Which makes us targets. Ethan rolled to the window, looked out at the city. I need to tell you something about the accident, about what actually happened that day. Charlotte set down her coffee. Okay. I was leaving a meeting with the chief financial officer. We'd been discussing irregularities in quarterly reports, money that didn't track properly, accounts that seemed designed to hide something. I was planning to bring it to the board to push for an audit. He paused, his hands gripping the wheelchair's armrests. The CFO committed suicide 2 weeks later, jumped from his office window. The police called it depression, work stress, personal problems, but I always wondered if someone helped him jump. You think Richard? I think Richard eliminates problems. The CFO found something, told me about it, and became a liability. I pushed for an audit and my brakes got cut. You investigated Meridian and your career got destroyed. Ethan turned back to face her. Everyone who gets close to the truth about Richard's operation ends up damaged or dead. That's who we're fighting. Charlotte felt cold despite the warm apartment. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I needed you to choose this for your own reasons, not because I scared you into it, and because I wasn't sure I could trust you. He held her gaze. But I trust you now, which means you need to know exactly how dangerous this is. If we go after Torres, if we push too hard too fast, Richard will push back, and he doesn't push gently. Are you saying we should stop? I'm saying we should be smart, careful, strategic. He rolled back to the table, picked up his phone. And I'm saying we need backup. Sarah Mitchell from the Wall Street Journal. She's sharp, she's thorough, and she hates corporate corruption. If we can give her enough evidence, she'll run with it, but we need more than we have. Charlotte's phone buzzed. Text from James. Torres agreed to meet tomorrow, 3 p.m., Metro Cafe on 5th. Says he'll give you 30 minutes. She showed it to Ethan. That's fast, he said. Too fast. He's either very confident or very scared. Only one way to find out which. Charlotte sat back down at the table, looked at the files spread across the surface. We have 24 hours to prepare. What do I need to know about Torres before I walk into that meeting? Ethan smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it looked genuine. Now you're thinking like an investigator. They spent the rest of the day building a profile. Torres's background, his finances, his connections, every piece of information they could find. By evening, Charlotte had memorized his work history, knew his vulnerabilities, understood exactly how to approach someone who'd been paid to help attempt a murder. By the time she went to bed, she had a plan. It was risky and probably stupid and might blow up in their faces. But it was the best chance they had to get the truth. Charlotte lay in the dark, thinking about tomorrow's meeting, about Richard's warning, about the CFO who jumped from a window, and the accident that should have killed Ethan. She thought about 6 months that were half over, and a contract that felt less important every day. Somewhere in this building, Ethan was probably awake too, probably thinking about the same things, probably wondering if they were making the right choice. Tomorrow would tell them one way or another. Charlotte closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that the next conversation would change everything, knowing that once she confronted Torres, there was no going back, knowing that the marriage she'd entered for money had become something she'd fight for even if she never saw another dollar. Morning would come soon enough, and with it, the truth, or something close to it. Daniel Torres was 20 minutes late, which told Charlotte everything she needed to know about his confidence level. People who were scared showed up early. People who thought they had the upper hand made you wait. She sat at a corner table in Metro Cafe, nursing a coffee that had gone cold, watching the door. James was positioned 3 tables away, reading a newspaper like he had nothing better to do, but Charlotte knew he was tracking every person who entered, every exit, every potential threat. When Torres finally arrived, he looked exactly like his photos. Mid-40s, expensive suit that didn't quite fit right, the kind of face that disappeared in crowds. He scanned the cafe, found Charlotte, and walked over with the deliberate pace of someone who'd rehearsed this entrance. Miss Hayes. He didn't offer to shake hands. I have to admit, I was surprised by your call. Mrs. Caldwell, actually, but Charlotte is fine. She gestured to the chair across from her. Thanks for meeting me. Torres sat, ordered an espresso from the passing waiter, then leaned back in his chair with forced casualness. Your assistant said this was about Apex Automotive. That company dissolved 2 years ago. Not sure what I can tell you that isn't already public record. Public record shows you were on the board. What it doesn't show is why Caldwell Industries paid Apex over $100,000 for services that were never rendered. Charlotte pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. Fleet maintenance for vehicles that don't exist. Consulting services with no deliverables. Want to explain that? Torres glanced at the folder but didn't touch it. Those were legitimate business expenses. If there's a discrepancy, you should take it up with Caldwell Industries' accounting department. I did. They have no record of what services Apex provided. No contracts, no invoices, no paper trail beyond the payments themselves. Charlotte leaned forward. That's not accounting error. That's money laundering. And you're on the board of the company that received those payments 6 months before Ethan Caldwell's car accident. Are you accusing me of something, Mrs. Caldwell? I'm giving you a chance to explain before this information goes to the Wall Street Journal, the SEC, and every regulatory body that handles corporate fraud. She kept her voice level, professional. I used to work for the Manhattan DA's office. I know how these investigations work. Right now, you're a person of interest. Cooperate, and you stay that way. Refuse, and you become a target. Torres's espresso arrived. He took a long drink, buying time to think. Charlotte watched his hands, steady, controlled, but there was a slight tremor in his left index finger. Fear or anger, she couldn't tell which. I provided consulting services, he said finally. Strategic advisory work for Caldwell Industries' expansion into new markets. Nothing illegal about that. Then you won't mind providing documentation. Emails, reports, meeting notes. Anything that shows you actually did the work you were paid for. Those files were destroyed when Apex dissolved. Standard document retention policies. Convenient. Charlotte pulled out another page from her folder. This is your sister, Maria Torres. She works in Richard Caldwell's personal office. Has for 3 years. Want to explain how you ended up on the board of a company that received suspicious payments from Caldwell Industries right before the chairman had a convenient accident? Torres's expression finally cracked. You're reaching. My sister's employment has nothing to do with it, has everything to do with it. Richard needed someone he could trust to set up a shell company, funnel money, make payments look legitimate. You fit the profile perfectly. Financial background, family connection, desperate enough for money to take the risk. Charlotte leaned in closer. The question is whether you knew what the money was for. Whether you knew Richard was planning to kill his nephew, or if you just thought you were helping him steal from the company. I didn't know anything about an accident. Torres's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. And I'm not saying another word without a lawyer. Then get one, because this conversation is just the beginning. Charlotte stood, gathered her folder. I'll be filing a request with the SEC tomorrow for a full investigation into Apex Automotive and its financial relationship with Caldwell Industries. Your name will be in that request, so will your sister's. Think carefully about whether you want to go down protecting Richard Caldwell or whether you want to make a deal before the investigators show up. She walked away without waiting for a response. James folded his newspaper, followed at a discreet distance. They were a block from the cafe before he spoke. He's scared. He's terrified, which means he knows something. Charlotte kept walking, heart pounding, trying to look calmer than she felt. Did you get it? James tapped his phone. Every word, audio's clean, video's a little grainy but usable. Send it to Ethan and make a backup. If Torres calls Richard, which he probably will, we need to move fast. They reached the car. James drove while Charlotte replayed the conversation in her head, analyzing every word, every hesitation. Torres had denied knowledge of the accident too quickly, too defensively. Innocent people asked questions. Guilty people made statements. Her phone rang. Ethan. How did it go? He lawyered up, but not before essentially confirming he took payments for work he never did and has family connections to Richard's office. Charlotte watched the city slide past the window. He's going to call Richard, probably already has. Good. Let him panic. Panicked people make mistakes. Ethan paused. James is bringing you back here. We need to talk about next steps. Which are? Accelerating the timeline. Richard knows we're investigating now. He'll either try to shut us down or eliminate the evidence. We need to move first. The car pulled up to their building. Charlotte rode the elevator up, walked into the apartment to find Ethan surrounded by more files than she'd ever seen, laptop screens showing financial charts and corporate documents. I've been pulling together everything we have, he said without preamble. The Apex payments, Meridian Holdings, your scandal, the CFO's suicide. It's all connected, but we're still missing the center, the proof that Richard orchestrated all of it. Charlotte dropped her bag, joined him at the table. Torres knows. He might not have known about the accident specifically, but he knows Richard is dirty, and his sister works directly for Richard. If we can get to her, we won't. Maria Torres has been with Richard for 3 years. She's loyal, well-paid, and probably knows enough to send her to prison if she talks. She's not flipping. Ethan pulled up a new document. But I found something else while you were gone. The CFO who died, Marcus Webb. He left behind a widow, Catherine. She's been living quietly in Connecticut, hasn't given an interview since his death. But 6 months ago, she hired a lawyer and filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Caldwell Industries. On what grounds? Workplace negligence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, corporate conspiracy. The suit was settled quietly for an undisclosed amount, sealed by court order. Ethan looked up at her. Why would Richard settle a nuisance lawsuit unless there was something in Marcus Webb's files that he didn't want discovered? Charlotte felt adrenaline spike through her system. You think Webb found evidence before he died? Something concrete enough that his widow could use it as leverage. I think Richard paid her to keep quiet, and I think she might still have whatever Marcus found. Ethan rolled to the window, looked out at the afternoon light. The question is whether she'll talk to us. She lost her husband. If we can prove Richard was responsible, then she gets justice and we get evidence. But approaching her is risky. If Richard finds out, he'll know exactly what we're looking for. Charlotte thought about it, running scenarios. What if we don't approach her directly? What if we go through her lawyer? Make it seem like we're investigating corporate fraud generally, not targeting Richard specifically. Her lawyer is bound by attorney-client privilege. He won't share anything without her permission. But he might tell her we're asking, and if she wants to talk, she'll reach out. Charlotte started pacing, the way she always did when she was thinking. We have nothing to lose by trying. Worst case, the lawyer says no, and Catherine never knows we asked. Best case, she's been waiting 2 years for someone to ask the right questions. Ethan watched her pace, something almost like admiration in his expression. You're good at this, better than you give yourself credit for. I'm desperate. There's a difference. No, you're thorough. Desperate people make mistakes. You're 3 steps ahead, always thinking about consequences. He pulled up the lawyer's information on his screen. His name is Robert Chen, practices in Hartford, specializes in corporate litigation. I'll call him tomorrow, feel out whether Catherine might be willing to talk. What do we do in the meantime? We prepare for Richard's response. Torres is going to tell him about your meeting. Richard is going to escalate. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, face darkening. Or he already has. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Motion to remove me as chairman on grounds of instability and failure to disclose material information. Charlotte stopped pacing. What material information? Doesn't matter. It's a pretext. Richard is making his move. Ethan set down his phone with controlled precision. This is it, Charlotte. The endgame. If we don't have enough to stop him tomorrow, I lose the company. And you lose your leverage to investigate Meridian. What do we have that we can use? The Apex payments. Your testimony about Torres's reaction. The pattern of suspicious transactions through Meridian Holdings. Ethan pulled up a list on his laptop. It's circumstantial. It suggests wrongdoing, but doesn't prove it. A good lawyer could argue it's all coincidence, that Richard had no knowledge of what subordinates were doing, that the payments were legitimate. Then we need Catherine Webb. We need whatever Marcus found before he died. We have 12 hours. Connecticut is 2 hours away, assuming she's even home. Assuming she'll talk to strangers, assuming she kept whatever evidence she had instead of destroying it as part of the settlement. Ethan met Charlotte's eyes. Those are a lot of assumptions. You have a better plan? No, which is why we're going to Connecticut. He rolled toward his office. I'll have James arrange a car. We leave in an hour. Bring everything we have on Marcus Webb, the CFO's death, the settlement. If Catherine agrees to see us, we need to look legitimate. Charlotte went to her room, changed into something more professional, gathered files into a briefcase she'd never used before. Her hands shook slightly as she packed, not from fear, but from the realization that everything they'd been building toward was happening now, faster than expected, with less preparation than she'd wanted. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Stop. Last warning. The board meeting tomorrow is your final chance to walk away. After that, I can't protect you. She showed it to Ethan when she emerged from her room. He read it, deleted it, handed back her phone. Richard's getting nervous. Good. Nervous people make mistakes bigger than the ones careful people make. What if he's right? What if we should walk away? Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Do you want to walk away? Charlotte thought about the apartment that smelled like curry, about the career she'd lost, about 5 years of wondering why her life had imploded. Thought about Richard Caldwell's smile and the CFO who'd jumped from a window and Ethan's wheelchair and the brake line that had been cut. No, she said. I want to finish this. Then we finish it. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. The drive to Connecticut took 2.5 hours through traffic that crawled. Charlotte used the time to review Marcus Webb's file. Brilliant CFO, 20 years at Caldwell Industries, wife and 2 kids, no history of depression or mental health issues until suddenly he jumped from his office window on a Tuesday afternoon. The police report was brief. No note, no witnesses. Security footage showed him alone in his office before he went out the window. Toxicology came back clean. The conclusion, suicide while the balance of his mind was disturbed. But there were inconsistencies. Marcus had scheduled meetings for the following week, had made dinner reservations for his anniversary, had texted his wife that morning saying he'd found something important and would tell her about it that night. Then he died, and whatever he'd found died with him. Except maybe it hadn't. Catherine Webb's house was in a quiet suburb, the kind of place where lawns were manicured and neighbors knew each other's names. Charlotte and Ethan sat in the car for a moment, staring at the white Colonial with black shutters. She might not be home, Charlotte said. She's home. Her car's in the driveway. She might not answer the door. Then we leave a card and hope she calls. Ethan rolled his wheelchair to the back of the car while James retrieved it. But we have to try. They approached the house together, Charlotte slightly ahead, Ethan following in the wheelchair. She rang the bell, heard footsteps inside, held her breath. The woman who opened the door was younger than Charlotte expected, mid-40s, dark hair streaked with gray, eyes that looked tired and wary. Catherine Webb? Charlotte asked. Who's asking? My name is Charlotte Caldwell. This is my husband, Ethan. We'd like to talk to you about your late husband if you have a few minutes. Catherine's expression closed down immediately. I don't give interviews. I don't discuss Marcus. Whatever you're selling, I'm not interested. She started to close the door. Ethan spoke quickly. Richard Caldwell tried to kill me 6 months ago. I think he killed your husband 2 years before that. And I think you know why. Catherine froze, hand on the door, looking between them. Charlotte could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Trust or safety, truth or peace, justice or survival. 5 minutes, Catherine said finally, stepping back to let them in. The house was neat, impersonal, like a hotel room that someone lived in but never made home. Catherine led them to a living room with furniture that looked expensive but unused. Marcus didn't jump, she said before they'd even sat down. He was pushed. I know it. The police don't care. And Caldwell Industries paid me $2 million to shut up about it. Charlotte felt something slot into place. You took the settlement. I took the money. I have 2 kids to put through college and a mortgage I couldn't pay on my own. Richard Caldwell's lawyer made it very clear that if I pursued the wrongful death claim, I'd spend years in litigation, lose everything, and probably end up with nothing. Catherine's voice was bitter. So yes, I took the settlement, but I never signed a non-disclosure agreement. They thought they were buying my silence. They just bought my time. Ethan leaned forward. What did Marcus find? What got him killed? Proof. Real proof, not just suspicious payments and coincidences. Marcus had been tracking irregularities for months. Money moving through shell companies, payments that didn't match invoices, transactions designed to hide theft. He compiled everything into a file: bank records, offshore accounts, email correspondence between Richard and the people helping him steal. Catherine stood, walked to a bookshelf, pulled down what looked like a photo album. The morning he died, Marcus sent me this. Said if anything happened to him, I should give it to the authorities. She handed the album to Ethan. He opened it, and Charlotte leaned over to see. Inside weren't photos. They were documents, hundreds of pages, meticulously organized, showing a network of fraud that went back over a decade. Payments to Meridian Holdings, transactions through Apex Automotive, emails between Richard and board members discussing how to handle problems. And in the middle of it all, a spreadsheet showing exactly how much Richard had stolen. Over $50 million, siphoned gradually from Caldwell Industries and hidden in accounts across 3 countries. Why didn't you give this to the police? Charlotte asked, barely breathing. Because the last page is Marcus's analysis of who was complicit. It's not just Richard. It's 3 board members, 2 executives, and the chief legal counsel. All of them benefiting from the fraud. All of them with enough power to bury an investigation before it started. Catherine sat back down, looking exhausted. I gave it to my lawyer instead. Told him to keep it safe until I decided what to do with it. Then Caldwell Industries made their settlement offer, and I took the easy way out. I've regretted it every day since. Ethan was carefully turning pages, his expression growing darker with each one. This is everything. Bank records, wire transfers, email correspondence. With this, we can prove Richard's been embezzling for years. We can prove he's been paying people off, silencing witnesses, eliminating anyone who got too close. Can you prove he killed Marcus? No, Ethan admitted. This shows motive and opportunity, but not evidence of murder. The police ruled it suicide. Without a witness or physical evidence, we can't change that ruling. Catherine's face fell. So Marcus died for nothing. No, Charlotte said firmly. Marcus died because he found the truth. And now we're going to use that truth to make sure Richard pays for everything he's done. She looked at Catherine. We need this file, all of it. We have a board meeting tomorrow morning where Richard is trying to force Ethan out of the company. If we show up with this evidence, we can stop him. We can expose everything. And then what? Richard has lawyers, money, connections. Even with proof, he might walk away. Maybe. But we'll make sure everyone knows what he did, the board, the shareholders, the press. Even if he avoids criminal charges, his reputation will be destroyed. He'll lose his position, his influence, everything he's built. Ethan closed the album carefully. That's not the same as justice for Marcus, but it's something. Catherine was quiet for a long time, staring at the album in Ethan's hands. Marcus always said you were the only person at Caldwell Industries who actually cared about doing the right thing. That's why he went to you with what he found. He trusted you. And I got him killed by pushing for an audit, Ethan said quietly. I should have been more careful, should have protected him better. Richard killed him, not you. Catherine stood, walked to the window. Take the file, use it. Make that bastard pay for what he did to my husband. And when you're done, I want my settlement back. Every penny. I don't want Richard Caldwell's blood money anymore. Charlotte and Ethan left Connecticut as the sun was setting, the album secure in a briefcase that James carried like it contained nuclear codes. The drive back was silent, both of them processing what they'd found, what it meant, how to use it. We should call the board members, Charlotte said as they hit the highway. Send them copies of the evidence before the meeting. Let them know what they're walking into. No. If we do that, Richard will know we have it. He'll have time to prepare, to craft a response, to threaten the other conspirators into silence. Ethan looked out the window at the darkening sky. We show up tomorrow morning with Catherine's file, and we drop it on the table like a bomb. No warning, no preparation, just truth, all at once, too big to ignore. He'll fight back. He'll claim it's fabricated, that Catherine is lying, that we manufactured evidence. Let him. We have Marcus's original emails, bank records that can be verified, transactions that tie directly to Richard's personal accounts. The evidence speaks for itself. Ethan turned to look at her. Tomorrow morning, we end this, one way or another. They reached the apartment after 9. Charlotte ordered food neither of them ate, made coffee neither of them drank, tried to sleep in a bed that felt too soft and too cold. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus Webb falling from a window, saw the CFO who'd trusted the wrong person, saw Richard Caldwell smiling while people died. At 3 a.m, she gave up on sleep, went to the living room, found Ethan still awake, still reviewing the files. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Too much adrenaline." She sat on the couch, pulled a blanket around her shoulders. What happens after tomorrow? If we win, if Richard gets exposed, if everything works the way we hope? The company stabilizes. The fraud gets investigated. Richard probably faces criminal charges, definitely loses his position. Ethan closed his laptop. "And you get your divorce settlement like we agreed." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "What if I don't want the divorce?" The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in hours. "Charlotte, I know what the contract says. 6 months, $2 million, clean exit. But somewhere in the last few weeks, this stopped being about money. It started being about," she struggled to find the right words, "about having a partner. Someone who doesn't treat me like I'm broken or used up or damaged. Someone who sees me as useful instead of liability. That's gratitude. It's not gratitude. It's recognition. You look at me like I'm capable of solving problems instead of creating them, like my skills matter more than my mistakes. And I look at you like you're more than the wheelchair, more than the accident, more than Richard's target." Charlotte met his eyes. "I don't know what that is exactly, but I know I don't want it to end just because 6 months are up." Ethan was quiet for so long that Charlotte thought she'd miscalculated, said too much, revealed too much. Then he spoke, voice rough. "When I offered you this arrangement, I thought I was buying convenience. A solution to a problem, wrapped up in a contract. I didn't expect to find someone who actually understood what I was fighting for." He rolled closer to the couch. "You're right that this isn't just a business arrangement anymore, but I don't know what it is instead. And I don't know if it's fair to ask you to stay when your whole life got destroyed because of my family. Richard destroyed my life, not you. There's a difference." Charlotte pulled the blanket tighter. "I'm not saying we need to decide everything tonight. I'm just saying maybe we don't have to end this just because the contract does. Maybe we figure out what comes next when we get there. After tomorrow, everything changes. Win or lose, we won't be fighting Richard anymore. We'll have to figure out what a marriage looks like when it's not built on survival." "I can live with that uncertainty," Charlotte said. "Can you?" Ethan smiled, and it was real, tired, hopeful. "Yeah, I can live with that." They sat together in the pre-dawn quiet, two people who'd started as strangers in a calculated arrangement and somehow become something neither of them had expected. Outside, the city was beginning to wake. In a few hours, they'd walk into a boardroom and gamble everything on truth being stronger than power. But for now, they just sat together, partners in every sense that mattered, ready to face whatever came next. Charlotte must have dozed eventually because she woke to sunlight and Ethan's hand on her shoulder. "It's time," he said. She got up, got dressed, put on armor disguised as a business suit. Ethan wore the navy blue he always wore to board meetings, looking calm and controlled and nothing like someone about to blow up his uncle's entire operation. James drove them to Caldwell Industries Tower. Charlotte carried the briefcase with Marcus Webb's file, feeling the weight of it, the evidence that would either save them or mean nothing at all. The boardroom was already full when they arrived, 12 members plus Richard, all of them looking serious and uncomfortable. Richard sat at the far end of the table, the same spot he'd occupied at every meeting, smiling his poisonous smile. "Ethan, Charlotte, good of you to join us." He gestured to the empty chairs. "Shall we begin?" Ethan rolled to the head of the table, Charlotte standing beside him. She set the briefcase down carefully, didn't open it yet. "Before we start," Ethan said, "I'd like to address the motion to remove me as chairman. I understand there are concerns about undisclosed material information. I'm here to disclose that information now." Richard's smile widened. "By all means, transparency is important." Ethan nodded to Charlotte. She opened the briefcase, pulled out the file, began distributing copies to each board member. She watched their faces as they started reading. Confusion first, then comprehension, then shock. "What you're looking at," Ethan said calmly, "is evidence compiled by our former CFO, Marcus Webb, showing systematic embezzlement from Caldwell Industries over the past decade. $50 million stolen through shell companies, offshore accounts, and fraudulent transactions. The evidence includes bank records, email correspondence, and a complete accounting of where the money went and who benefited. Richard's smile had frozen on his face. This is absurd. Marcus Webb was mentally unstable. Everyone knows he committed suicide. Marcus Webb was murdered because he found proof of your crimes. Charlotte's voice cut through the room like a knife. He documented everything. The Meridian Holdings fraud, the Apex Automotive payments, the conspiracy to force Ethan out of leadership. All of it leads back to you, Richard. One of the board members, elderly, serious-faced, looked up from the file. These bank records show transfers from Caldwell Industries accounts to offshore holdings in Richard's name. This is embezzlement. This is fraud. It's fabricated, Richard said, but his voice had lost its confidence. They manufactured this evidence to discredit me because they're losing control. The records can be verified, Ethan said. Every transaction, every account number, every email. We've already sent copies to the SEC, the FBI, and the Wall Street Journal. By tomorrow morning, this will be public. The question is what the board chooses to do about it today. The room erupted, board members shouting questions, demanding explanations, looking between Richard and Ethan like they were watching a bomb explode in slow motion. Richard stood, his face red with rage. You have no idea what you've done. You think exposing this will hurt me? I have lawyers. I have connections. I'll tie this up in litigation for years while Caldwell Industries burns to the ground around you. Maybe, Ethan said, but you'll burn with it. Your reputation, your position, your freedom. Everything you've built by stealing from the company my father created. Was it worth it, Uncle? $50 million and a trail of bodies? Richard's hand shook as he pointed at Charlotte. This is her fault. She's been poisoning you against me, feeding you lies, manipulating you since the day you married her. She's using you, Ethan, just like she's used everyone else in her pathetic career. Charlotte stepped forward, voice steady. I'm not the one who destroyed Marcus Webb. I'm not the one who cut Ethan's brake line. I'm not the one who stole $50 million from family. That's all you, Richard, and now everyone knows. The board chairman, a woman in her 60s who'd been silent until now, stood up. This meeting is over. Richard, you're suspended pending investigation. Security will escort you from the building. The board will convene an emergency session tomorrow to discuss permanent removal and criminal referral. She looked at Ethan. You'll remain as chairman, and you'll work with investigators to ensure full transparency. Richard's face had gone white. You're making a mistake. All of you. When I prove this is fabricated, security is waiting outside, the chairman said coldly. Don't make this worse than it already is. 2 security guards appeared at the door. Richard looked around the table one last time, searching for allies, finding none. Then he walked out, shoulders straight, still trying to maintain dignity, even as his empire collapsed. When the door closed behind him, the room released a collective breath. We'll need full access to Marcus Webb's widow, the chairman said to Ethan, and copies of everything you just presented. The board will be conducting its own investigation in parallel with regulatory authorities. You'll have everything, Ethan promised. The meeting adjourned. Board members filed out, some congratulating Ethan, others avoiding eye contact, all of them looking shell-shocked. Charlotte gathered up the copies of the file, her hand steady now that it was over. When they were finally alone in the boardroom, Ethan let out a long breath. We did it, he said quietly. We did it, Charlotte agreed. They sat in silence for a moment, processing everything that had just happened. Richard was gone. The evidence was public. The investigation would follow, and justice, however imperfect, would be served. What happens now? Charlotte asked. Ethan rolled to the window, looked out at the city. Now we rebuild. Fix what Richard broke, restore what he stole, prove that Caldwell Industries can survive his betrayal. He turned back to face her. And we figure out what our marriage looks like when we're not fighting for survival. Charlotte joined him at the window. I'm still not sure I know how to do that. Neither am I, but we have time to learn. Ethan reached for her hand. The contract was 6 months. We're only halfway through. Let's see what the second half looks like. She squeezed his hand, felt something settle in her chest that might have been hope or relief, or the beginning of something real? Outside, the city spread out before them, full of possibility, full of challenges, full of a future they'd have to build together. But for the first time since this started, Charlotte thought they might actually succeed. The Wall Street Journal ran the story 3 days later, front page above the fold. Sarah Mitchell had done her homework, interviews with board members, verification of the financial records, quotes from Catherine Webb about Marcus's death. The headline was brutal and accurate. Caldwell Industries CFO's widow breaks silence. My husband was murdered for uncovering $50 million fraud. Charlotte read it over coffee in the apartment that still didn't quite feel like home, watching Ethan scan the article on his laptop with an expression she couldn't read. She didn't mention the settlement, he said finally. Catherine said she wanted her integrity back. This is how she gets it. Charlotte set down the paper. Richard's lawyers will fight this. They'll claim Marcus was unstable, that the evidence was tampered with, that we orchestrated everything to discredit him. Let them fight. The SEC has the original bank records. The FBI is investigating the offshore accounts, and 3 board members resigned yesterday rather than face questioning. Ethan closed the laptop. Richard's done. Even if he avoids prison, he's finished in corporate circles. That doesn't feel like enough. It never does. Justice isn't about revenge, Charlotte. It's about stopping the damage and making sure it doesn't happen again. He rolled away from the table, moved to the window where morning light made the city look clean and new. Marcus Webb is still dead. Your career was still destroyed. I still need this wheelchair. We can't undo any of that. All we can do is make sure Richard doesn't hurt anyone else. Charlotte joined him at the window, stood close enough that their reflections overlapped in the glass. When does it stop feeling like we lost even though we won? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. Ethan's voice was quiet. But we're still here, we're still fighting. That counts for something. The first criminal charges were filed a week later. Securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit embezzlement. Federal prosecutors held a press conference announcing the indictment, standing in front of cameras with the confidence of people who had bulletproof evidence. Richard's lawyer issued a statement denying everything, claiming political persecution and corporate rivalry. Nobody believed him. Charlotte watched the press conference from Caldwell Industries headquarters, standing in Ethan's office, 43 floors above a city that suddenly felt smaller. She'd spent the week working with investigators, walking them through the financial records, explaining how the money had moved and where it had gone. The work was familiar, comforting even, solving puzzles, following trails, finding truth buried in numbers. You're good at this, Ethan had said one evening, watching her explain a particularly complex transaction chain to an FBI agent. You should consider doing it professionally again. I have a non-compete clause with being your wife, she'd replied, not quite joking. The contract expires in 2 months. After that, you're free to do whatever you want. The words had hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to discuss. Now, watching Richard's empire collapse on television, Charlotte thought about freedom and what it actually meant. She'd entered this arrangement desperate for escape, willing to trade 6 months of performance for enough money to disappear. But somewhere between the gala in Connecticut and the boardroom confrontation, escape had stopped being the goal. She'd found something else instead: purpose, partnership, the satisfaction of uncovering truth and using it to create change. Her phone buzzed. Text from Catherine Webb. Thank you for finishing what Marcus started. Charlotte replied, thank you for trusting us with his work. Another text, this time from a number she didn't recognize. Miss Hayes, this is Robert Chen, Catherine Webb's attorney. My client would like to discuss establishing a foundation in Marcus's name, focused on supporting whistleblowers and protecting corporate investigators. She's asked if you'd be interested in serving on the board. Details to follow if interested. Charlotte stared at the message, feeling something shift in her chest. A foundation. Real work. Using her actual skills. Helping people who'd been destroyed the way she'd been destroyed. She showed the text to Ethan when he emerged from his afternoon meeting with the board. Are you going to accept? He asked. I don't know. It's complicated. Because of us? Because of everything. Charlotte set down her phone. 2 months ago, I was broke and unemployed, living in an apartment that smelled like curry, with no future and a past I couldn't escape. Now I'm married to a billionaire, helping investigate federal crimes, getting offers to join foundation boards. It doesn't feel real. It's real. You earned all of it. Ethan rolled closer. The foundation work, the investigation, the respect you're getting from people who matter. That's not because you married me. That's because you're brilliant at what you do and people are finally seeing it. But I only got the chance because you hired me for a fake marriage. True. But you turned that fake marriage into something that mattered. You found evidence that brought down a criminal. You gave Catherine Webb justice for her husband. You helped protect a company that employs 5,000 people. He looked up at her. The marriage might have started as strategy, but what you've accomplished is all you. Charlotte sat down on the edge of his desk, suddenly tired. What happens when the contract ends? When I'm not your wife anymore and I have to figure out who I am without that role? Then you figure it out, same as everyone else who goes through a transition. Ethan's voice was gentle. But you don't have to do it alone. The contract might end, but that doesn't mean we do. Unless you want to. I don't know what I want, except to stop feeling like my entire life is borrowed or performed or temporary. So make it permanent. Accept the foundation position. Build a career that's yours. Stay in New York or leave. Keep the apartment or find something new. Stay married or get divorced. Just make choices that belong to you instead of reacting to what other people did to you. Charlotte looked at him. At this man who'd offered her money and given her something more valuable instead. The chance to remember who she was before everything fell apart. What do you want? From me? From this marriage? From whatever comes next? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. I want a partner. Someone who challenges me, who doesn't treat me like I'm fragile, who sees past the wheelchair and the money and the corporate drama. I thought I was hiring someone to play a role. Instead, I found someone who makes me want to stop performing entirely. He met her eyes. But I don't want you to stay because of obligation or gratitude or contracts. I want you to stay because you choose to. And if you don't choose that, I'll understand. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone who's still figuring out how to trust their own judgment. Then take your time. The contract doesn't expire for 8 weeks. Use them. Accept the foundation position. Build something real. Figure out what you want your life to look like. I'll still be here when you're ready to decide. Charlotte nodded, not trusting her voice. She went back to her office. They'd given her an office 3 doors down from Ethan's. Official title, special consultant. Unofficial role, the person who saved the company from implosion, and stared at Robert Chen's message for a long time before finally typing a response. I'm interested. Let's schedule a call to discuss details. The foundation work started slowly. Conference calls with Catherine and her lawyer, discussions about mission and structure and funding. Charlotte found herself energized by it in ways she hadn't expected, excited to build something from nothing, to create systems that would protect people the way she wished someone had protected her. Meanwhile, Richard's legal battles intensified. His lawyers filed motion after motion, challenging evidence, demanding dismissals, claiming prosecutorial misconduct. The judge denied everything, set a trial date for the following year. Richard posted bail and disappeared into a mansion in the Hamptons, giving no interviews, making no public appearances, probably strategizing his next move. He's not done, James said one evening, standing in Ethan's office during a security briefing. Men like Richard don't accept defeat. They regroup. Well, let him regroup, Ethan said. We have evidence, witnesses, federal prosecutors who smell blood. Even if he somehow beats the criminal charges, the civil suits will destroy him. The company's already filed for recovery of stolen funds. Catherine's reopening her wrongful death case. The shareholders are preparing a class action. Richard's going to spend the rest of his life in courtrooms. Unless he runs. He won't run. That would be admitting guilt. Richard's too proud for that. Ethan looked at Charlotte. But James is right that we need to stay careful. Desperate people do desperate things. Charlotte had been receiving threats since the Wall Street Journal story broke. Anonymous emails, blocked phone calls, messages that ranged from crude insults to detailed descriptions of violence. James had traced most of them to random internet trolls, nothing credible, but he'd still insisted on increased security. She now had a driver, a panic button app on her phone, and instructions to never go anywhere alone. It felt excessive until the morning she found a dead rat on the doorstep of the apartment building, a note attached to its tail. Rats get exterminated. James handled it with his usual efficiency. Police report filed, building security upgraded, the incident documented for the prosecutors building their case against Richard. But Charlotte couldn't shake the image, the message, the reminder that Richard might be facing criminal charges, but he still had reach. "I want to leave the city for a while," she said to Ethan that night. "Just a few days. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I can think without looking over my shoulder." "Where?" "I don't know. Anywhere that isn't here." Ethan made a phone call. 2 days later, they were in a car heading north, James driving, destination a house in the Berkshires that belonged to someone Ethan knew who owed him a favor. 3 hours from the city, surrounded by trees that were starting to turn autumn colors, no neighbors for miles. Charlotte stood on the deck of the house, breathing air that smelled like pine and earth instead of exhaust and concrete, feeling tension drain from her shoulders for the first time in weeks. "Better?" Ethan asked, rolling out onto the deck beside her. "Much better." She looked at the trees, the mountains in the distance, the sky that seemed bigger here. "Thank you for this. Thank you for not making me stay in the city during the media circus." He gestured to the woods around them. "We can stay as long as you want. I can work remotely, James can handle security, and you can figure out what you want to do about the foundation offer without reporters camping outside." They stayed a week, long enough for Charlotte to sleep through the night without nightmares about dead rats and threatening messages. Long enough to have actual conversations instead of strategic planning sessions. Long enough to remember what it felt like to exist without performing. One evening, sitting on the deck watching the sun set, Ethan asked the question Charlotte had been avoiding. "Have you decided about the foundation?" "I'm accepting the position. Catherine and I had a call yesterday. We're planning to launch in the spring." Charlotte pulled her jacket tighter against the cooling air. "It feels right. Like something Marcus would have wanted. Like something I need to do." "That's good. You'll be excellent at it." "It means staying in New York. At least for a while until the foundation is established and running." She looked at him. "Is that a problem?" "Why would it be a problem?" "Because in 6 weeks our contract expires, and I don't know what happens after that. Whether I stay in the apartment or find my own place, whether we're still married or signing divorce papers, whether any of this was real or just very convincing performance." Ethan was quiet, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Do you want it to be real?" "I want to stop questioning everything. I want to wake up and know that the life I'm living actually belongs to me instead of being something I borrowed or stole or performed my way into." Charlotte's voice cracked slightly. "I want to believe that somewhere in the last 4 months, I became someone worth choosing instead of someone desperate enough to accept whatever was offered." "Charlotte." Ethan reached for her hand. "Look at me." She did, and found him watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. Open, vulnerable, nothing like the controlled mask he wore for everyone else. "You were always worth choosing," he said quietly. "I didn't see it at first. I thought I was hiring someone convenient, someone who needed money badly enough to accept my terms. But you were never just convenient. You were brilliant and stubborn and angry in ways that matched how I was angry. You took a fake arrangement and made it mean something. You found evidence that saved the company and brought down a criminal and gave a widow justice. You did that, not because of the contract, not because of me, because that's who you are. But would you have noticed any of that if you hadn't needed a wife to satisfy your board? Probably not, which is my failure, not yours." He squeezed her hand gently. "I've spent 5 years since the accident performing strength because admitting weakness felt like giving Richard ammunition. You're the first person who saw through that performance and didn't care. You treated me like a person instead of a position or a disability or a problem to solve. That's rare. That's valuable. That's why I don't want this to end when the contract does." Charlotte felt tears on her face, surprising her. "I don't know how to be in a real relationship. All my relationships have been disasters. Bad judgment, worse timing, people who used me or lied to me or disappeared when things got hard. So we figure it out together. We've survived Richard Caldwell. We can probably survive learning how to be married for real instead of for strategy." Ethan smiled slightly. "No contract this time. No settlement, no performance. Just 2 people who started as strangers and became something neither of us expected." What if we're terrible at it? Then we'll be terrible at it together, which is still better than being alone and wondering what might have happened if we'd tried. Charlotte laughed through her tears, the sound surprising her. That's the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. It wasn't a proposal, it was a statement of intent. He pulled her closer, his hand warm in hers. But if you want romance, I can probably manage something more eloquent than, we might be terrible at this, but let's try anyway. No, I like the honesty. Romance is performance. This is real. They sat together on the deck as the sun finished setting and the stars began to appear. Two people who'd built a marriage on lies, discovering that somewhere underneath the performance, something true had taken root. The next morning, Charlotte called Catherine Webb. I'm accepting the foundation position, she said, and I want to make sure we do this right. Not just lip service to whistleblower protection, but real support, legal funds, career counseling, mental health resources, everything I wish I'd had when my life fell apart. Catherine's voice was warm. That's exactly what Marcus would have wanted. When can you start? Immediately. Well, after I deal with some personal matters. But soon. Personal matters like deciding whether to stay married to Ethan Caldwell? Charlotte laughed. How did you know about that? You're not as subtle as you think. I saw the way you looked at him in my living room. That wasn't strategy. That was something real. Catherine paused. For what it's worth, Marcus always said Ethan was different from the rest of the family. More interested in building things than acquiring them. The kind of person you could trust in a crisis. Sounds like he was right. He was right, Charlotte agreed. They talked for another hour about foundation plans, budget projections, hiring timelines. When Charlotte finally hung up, she felt settled in a way she hadn't since before the Meridian scandal. She had work that mattered. She had people who believed in her. She had a future that belonged to her instead of being something she'd stumbled into by accident. And she had Ethan, who'd offered her money and given her something more valuable instead. The chance to remember who she was when she wasn't running or hiding or performing. They returned to the city 3 days later, driving through traffic that was frustrating and familiar, returning to an apartment that was starting to feel less borrowed. Charlotte unpacked while Ethan caught up on emails, both of them settling back into routines that had become comfortable without either of them noticing. That evening, Charlotte found Ethan in his office, staring at something on his laptop with an expression she couldn't read. What's wrong? Richard's lawyer just filed a motion to dismiss all charges, claims the evidence was obtained illegally, that Catherine's settlement agreement prevents her from testifying, that we fabricated documents to frame him. Ethan scrolled through the legal filing. It's garbage. None of it will hold up. But it'll delay the trial, tie up the prosecutors, make this drag out for another year. Can he win? Win the motion? No. Win the trial? Unlikely. But he can make this expensive and exhausting and public, which is probably the point. Make us regret exposing him. Make Catherine regret breaking her silence. Make everyone who helped us think twice before they cross powerful people. Ethan closed the laptop with controlled precision. Richard's not trying to beat the charges. He's trying to destroy us for filing them. Charlotte sat down across from him. So what do? We keep going. We support Catherine. We help the prosecutors. We build the foundation. We live our lives. Richard wants us to be afraid. We refuse. He looked at her. But it's going to get worse before it gets better. The trial will be brutal. The media will dig into everything. Your past, my accident, our marriage. Nothing will be private. Are you prepared for that? I survived the Meridian scandal. I can survive this. Charlotte met his eyes. As long as we're doing it together. Together, Ethan agreed. The trial preparations consumed the next several months. Depositions, witness interviews, document review. Charlotte spent hours with prosecutors, walking them through the financial evidence, explaining how the fraud had worked, providing context for Marcus Webb's investigation. Catherine testified about her husband's death, about the settlement she'd accepted, about the files she'd kept hidden for 2 years. Board members testified about Richard's influence, his manipulation, his careful construction of a criminal enterprise disguised as corporate strategy. Richard sat through it all with the same smile he'd worn in the boardroom, looking confident and unconcerned, like this was a minor inconvenience rather than the collapse of his entire life. The foundation launched in April, 6 months after the boardroom confrontation. They held a small ceremony at a hotel, invited whistleblowers and journalists and lawyers who specialized in protecting corporate investigators. Charlotte gave a speech about Marcus Webb's courage, about the cost of truth-telling, about the importance of supporting people who risked everything to expose fraud. Ethan sat in the front row, watching her speak with an expression that made Charlotte's chest tight. After the ceremony, he rolled over to where she was accepting congratulations from Catherine. "You were amazing," he said simply. "I was nervous." "You hit it well. Very convincing performance." Charlotte smiled. "I'm done with performances. That was just me, being honest about what matters." "Even better then." The contract had expired 2 months earlier, quietly, without ceremony or discussion. Charlotte had simply stopped thinking of herself as someone playing a role and started thinking of herself as someone building a life. She'd kept the apartment, kept the marriage, kept showing up for foundation work and supporting Ethan through the trial preparations and figuring out how to be in a relationship that wasn't based on survival. It wasn't always smooth. They fought about small things, her tendency to leave coffee cups everywhere, his habit of working until 2 in the morning, the fact that neither of them knew how to communicate feelings without wrapping them in analysis and strategy. But they learned, slowly, imperfectly, with the same determination they'd brought to bringing down Richard. The trial finally began in June, almost a year after the boardroom confrontation. Charlotte attended every day, sitting behind the prosecutors, watching Richard's lawyers try to dismantle evidence that was ironclad. The defense claimed Marcus Webb had fabricated documents before his suicide, that Charlotte had manufactured evidence to frame Richard, that the entire prosecution was a conspiracy orchestrated by Ethan to steal control of the company. The jury didn't buy it. After 3 weeks of testimony, they deliberated for 6 hours and came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. Securities fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. The judge set sentencing for 2 months out, denying bail. Richard was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, finally looking his age, finally looking defeated. Charlotte watched him go and felt nothing, no triumph, no satisfaction, just a sense of completion. The man who'd destroyed her career was going to prison. The company was safe. Marcus Webb had justice, however imperfect. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded them asking for statements. Ethan kept it brief. Justice was served today. Not just for Caldwell Industries, but for Marcus Webb and everyone else Richard Caldwell harmed. We're grateful to the prosecutors, the jury, and everyone who had the courage to come forward with the truth. Charlotte added nothing. She'd said everything she needed to say during the trial. Now, she just wanted to go home. They had dinner that night at the apartment, just the two of them, eating takeout because neither felt like cooking. The television was off, the phones were silenced, the city spread out below them like a circuit board of lights. "How do you feel?" Ethan asked. "Tired, relieved, like I can finally stop looking over my shoulder." Charlotte set down her fork. "How about you?" "Grateful, for the verdict, for Catherine's courage, for you." He reached across the table, took her hand. "I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. Thank you for not walking away when you could have, for seeing this through even when it got dangerous and expensive and exhausting. You didn't have to do any of that." "Yes, I did, because somewhere between the contract and the investigation and learning how to be married for real, this stopped being about obligation. It became about partnership, about building something that mattered." Charlotte squeezed his hand. "You gave me a chance to remember who I was before everything fell apart. That's worth more than any settlement." "So no regrets?" "Plenty of regrets. I regret the apartment that smelled like curry, regret trusting the wrong supervisor, regret letting the Meridian scandal destroy my confidence. But I don't regret saying yes to your arrangement, even though it was insane and risky, and probably should have ended badly." She smiled. "Turns out sometimes the crazy gambles are the ones worth taking." Ethan stood, moved around the table, pulled her close. They'd gotten better at this, at physical closeness, at showing affection, at being vulnerable with each other. It still felt new, still required conscious effort, but it was getting easier. "I love you," he said quietly. "I don't know when it happened or how to explain it, but somewhere between hiring you and fighting Richard and learning that you leave coffee cups everywhere, I fell in love with you, and I wanted you to know that before anything else happens, before life gets complicated again, before we have to deal with sentencing and foundation work and whatever comes next, Charlotte felt tears again, the good kind this time. I love you too. Which is terrifying because I'm terrible at relationships, and you're the first person I've trusted in years, and I have no idea how to do this without screwing it up. So we screw it up together and fix it as we go. That's what partners do. They stood together in the apartment that had finally become home, two people who'd started as strangers in a calculated arrangement and somehow became everything neither of them knew they needed. Richard's sentencing hearing was held on a Tuesday in August, hot and humid, the kind of day that made the city feel like it was melting. The judge gave him 15 years in federal prison, with recommendations against early parole. Richard showed no emotion as the sentence was read, just nodded once and was led away. Catherine Webb wept quietly in the gallery. Charlotte reached over, took her hand, held it while the courtroom emptied. It's not enough, Catherine said. Marcus is still gone. 15 years doesn't bring him back. No, but it means Richard can't hurt anyone else. It means Marcus's work mattered. It means the truth won, even if the victory feels incomplete. Catherine nodded, wiped her eyes. The foundation. We'll make sure this never happens to anyone else. That's how we honor Marcus, by protecting the people who come after. They held a memorial service for Marcus Webb that weekend, small and private, attended by people who'd known him and people who'd been inspired by his courage. Charlotte spoke about the cost of truth-telling, about the price that whistleblowers paid, about the importance of creating systems that protected people instead of punishing them for being honest. Ethan listened from the back row, and when it was over, he told her she'd found her calling. You're good at this. Building things, protecting people, creating change. The foundation work suits you. It feels right, like something I was always supposed to do, but took a long detour to get here. Charlotte looked around the small chapel where they'd gathered. Marcus's death wasn't meaningless. It led to Richard's conviction, to the foundation, to systems that will protect people. That doesn't make it okay, but it makes it matter. They left the service together, drove back to the apartment through summer traffic, spent the evening on the couch, not talking, just existing in the same space. Charlotte had learned that some moments didn't need words, that sometimes presence was enough. The foundation grew steadily over the following months. They hired staff, established legal funds, created counseling programs for people whose careers had been destroyed by retaliation. Charlotte threw herself into the work, energized by helping people who reminded her of herself, smart, capable, devastated by betrayal, desperate for someone to believe them. One afternoon in October, she received an email from her former supervisor at the DA's office, the one who'd fed her false information, who'd taken early retirement with a generous settlement, who'd sold her out for $600,000. The email was brief. I saw the news about Richard Caldwell's conviction. I wanted to say I'm sorry for my role in what happened to you. It doesn't excuse what I did, but I thought you should know I regret it. You deserved better. Charlotte stared at the message for a long time, feeling complicated emotions she couldn't quite name. Anger that he'd waited 5 years to apologize. Relief that he'd acknowledged the truth. Frustration that sorry couldn't undo the damage. She showed it to Ethan that evening. Are you going to respond? He asked. I don't know. Part of me wants to tell him exactly what his betrayal cost me. Part of me just wants to delete it and move on. What do you want to accomplish by responding? Charlotte thought about it. I want him to understand that apologies don't erase consequences, that saying sorry 5 years too late doesn't magically restore what was destroyed, but I also want him to know I survived, that his betrayal didn't break me permanently, that I built something meaningful from the wreckage. So tell him that. She did, crafting a response that was honest without being cruel, that acknowledged his apology while making clear it changed nothing, that demonstrated she'd moved beyond being his victim. When she hit send, she felt lighter, like she'd finally closed a chapter that had been hanging open for too long. That night, lying in bed next to Ethan, Charlotte thought about the journey from desperate and broke to married and purposeful, about the contract that had expired 6 months ago, but somehow hadn't mattered because the relationship it created had become real, about Richard in prison and Marcus's foundation and Catherine finding peace and a former supervisor finally admitting the truth. Are you awake? She asked quietly. Yeah. Do you ever think about how different things would be if you hadn't shown up at my apartment that night? Ethan rolled onto his side, facing her in the dark. All the time. I think about you still living in that apartment, still struggling, still letting the Meridian scandal define you. I think about me losing the company to Richard, never finding the evidence, never bringing him to justice. We saved each other. We did, which is probably the best foundation for a marriage, mutual salvation disguised as a business arrangement. Charlotte laughed softly. That's still not romantic. No, but it's honest. And honesty matters more than romance. They were quiet for a while, just breathing in the dark. Two people who'd learned that sometimes the best relationships were the ones you built instead of the ones you fell into. I want to renew our vows, Charlotte said suddenly. Not because the contract requires it, not because we're performing for anyone, just because I want to stand in front of people who matter and choose you deliberately instead of desperately. When? I don't know. Next year, maybe? After the foundation is established, after Richard's appeals are exhausted, after we've had time to be married without crisis driving every decision. That sounds perfect. Terrifying and imperfect, and probably complicated, just like everything else we do. Charlotte smiled in the dark. Exactly. They planned the ceremony for the following spring, small and private, held in the same courthouse where they'd signed the original contract. But this time, there were no ulterior motives, no desperate timelines, no performance for cameras. Just two people choosing each other deliberately, witnesses who were friends instead of strangers, vows they wrote themselves instead of reciting from a standard template. Charlotte wore a simple dress, nothing like the expensive gown from the gala. Ethan wore the navy suit he always wore but looked somehow different in it, more relaxed, less defended, like he'd finally stopped performing and started living. Catherine Webb attended, bringing her children. James stood as Ethan's best man, looking uncomfortable in a tie but pleased nonetheless. The foundation staff came, along with a few board members who'd supported them during the fight against Richard. When the judge asked if they took each other as partners in marriage, Charlotte said yes without hesitation, meaning it more than she'd meant anything in her life. When it was over and they signed new papers that were identical to the old ones except in intent, Ethan pulled her close. No regrets? He asked, echoing the question from a year ago. Plenty of regrets still. But marrying you isn't one of them. Not the first time, not this time, not ever. They held a small reception at the apartment, eating food that James had somehow arranged despite claiming he knew nothing about party planning. Charlotte stood on the deck where she'd watched sunsets and made decisions and learned how to trust someone, looking out at the city that had broken her and rebuilt her. Ethan rolled out beside her, handed her a glass of champagne. What are you thinking about? He asked. About how a year ago I was desperate and broke, willing to marry a stranger for money. About how that desperation led here, to a foundation that matters, to a marriage that's real, to a life that feels like mine instead of borrowed. She looked at him. About how sometimes the worst moments create the best opportunities if you're brave enough to take them. Profound. You should put that in a speech. Maybe I will. Right after I finish dealing with the 3 grant applications waiting on my desk, and the interview with that journalist from Bloomberg, and the board meeting about expanding into the West Coast. Busy woman. Fulfilled woman, Charlotte corrected. There's a difference. They stood together watching the sun set over a city full of possibility. Two people who'd built something real from the ruins of desperation, who turned a calculated arrangement into a partnership that mattered, who'd learned that sometimes the best things in life were the ones you fought for instead of the ones that came easily. Later that night, after the guests had left and the apartment was quiet, Charlotte found the original contract in a drawer where she'd kept it. 6 months, $2 million, a clean exit. She read through it one last time, remembering the woman who'd signed it, desperate, damaged, willing to trade dignity for survival. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned that dignity couldn't be traded, only claimed. Someone who'd discovered that survival wasn't the same as living, that performance wasn't the same as authenticity, that desperation could transform into purpose if you were willing to do the work. Charlotte tore up the contract, let the pieces fall into the trash, and walked away from the woman she used to be. The foundation expanded over the next 2 years, helping dozens of whistleblowers, protecting investigators, creating change in corporate cultures that had punished honesty. Charlotte became known in legal circles as someone who protected truth-tellers, who understood the cost of courage, who'd been destroyed and rebuilt herself into something stronger. Ethan rebuilt Caldwell Industries into something his father would have been proud of: ethical, profitable, focused on building instead of acquiring. He and Charlotte became the kind of partners that people studied in business schools, the kind of marriage that proved you could build something lasting on a foundation of shared purpose instead of romance. Richard served his sentence in federal prison, filing appeals that were systematically denied, watching from behind bars as everything he'd built collapsed. His legacy became a cautionary tale about the cost of greed, about the danger of believing you were too smart to get caught. Marcus Webb's widow remarried eventually, to a man who'd known her husband and respected his memory. She remained active in the foundation, ensuring that Marcus's courage continued to protect people long after his death. And Charlotte, who'd started this journey desperate and broke and willing to trade 6 months of performance for financial security, discovered something she hadn't expected: that the best investments weren't measured in money, but in courage, that the best partnerships were built on honesty instead of strategy, and that sometimes the most meaningful things in life came from the moments when you were desperate enough to take risks you'd normally avoid. She'd entered a marriage for survival and found purpose instead. She'd performed love and discovered it had become real. She'd taken money to solve immediate problems and ended up solving deeper ones. The contract had expired long ago, but what it created continued: a foundation that mattered, a marriage that worked, a life that belonged to her instead of being something she'd borrowed or stolen or performed her way into. And on quiet evenings, standing on the deck of an apartment that finally felt like home, watching the city lights with a man who'd offered her money and given her so much more, Charlotte thought about the journey from desperation to fulfillment, from performance to authenticity, from survival to actually living. It hadn't been smooth, it hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Every risk, every fear, every moment of uncertainty, worth it. Because sometimes the crazy gambles were the ones that changed everything.